And welcome. We're going to get back to reading the ATF new rules. So we posted over on Instagram if you want to. Oops, what's happening here? Posted it over on Instagram. So that if you want to check that out. Otherwise, we got a poll going over here. There's only a couple of videos out that I'm aware of that are getting any reach that are focusing on this yet. So I'm curious to see what people think. Start doing polls each day. What you might think about who's going to get the most reach. Armed Scholar with 100 and something thousand views already. Guns and Gadgets, 50,000 views. Reno May, just behind him with 46,000 views. Firearms Policy, Matt just posted a video yesterday, so it hasn't been up as long. Just 3,000 views, but a summary after lawyers read it. So we'll get into it. This is the fourth session, fourth day of reading this. A couple of 3-hour days and an hour and a half, so something like 8 hours into it. Drinking some coffee here. Going to try to do this without commentary as much as possible. And Patriots out there, good afternoon. Is the audio okay? Scrolling down on the ATF's 364-page PDF to page 232, where it was just driving me nuts yesterday. I had to stop after 3 hours. So the goal here is to read it without any commentary, and I'm skipping certain things like the references to codes and the little footnotes and things to make it more understandable or reasonable. So thanks to our patrons that make it possible for us to spend the time on this without getting too much into it. I've been paying taxes, sent out the extension today, got a fine for the back taxes that I barely paid off this month, and realized that I got to file my, what is it called? My pre-quarterly thing for next year. So it's a lot of fun paying taxes for the bureaucracy that is creating this, which is taking us time this week to focus on. Thanks for the feedback. Thanks, Patriot, for the feedback. All right, so I'm going to start on page 233, because who cares? Starting at the top here. Comments received. This is on clarity of unlawful conduct. Commenters objecting to the proposed inclusion of weapons parts kits in the definition of firearms expressed concern about the expansion of conduct that would be considered unlawful. In the comment period, ATF explained it was clarifying that weapons parts kits are included under the definition of firearms, so that FFLs who sell these kits to unlicensed individuals would be required to complete the ATF Form 4473 background check and record keeping requirements. ATF further explained in footnote of the comment period that persons engaged in the business of selling or distributing weapons parts kits cannot avoid licensing, marking, record keeping, or other requirements to which FFLs are subject by selling, shipping the parts kits in more than one box, or shipment to the same person by conspiring with another person to do so. Commenters claimed that individuals, producers, and retailers would be left guessing what constitutes a weapons parts kit because, in the commenters' opinion, it was unclear from the proposed definition how many orders would constructively constitute a weapons parts kit over a period of time. They worried that a simple misstep, such as an individual selling components or tools that could be part of a weapons parts kit, could result in prison time if the individual selling the components or tools could be viewed as having conspired with the dealers or manufacturers to sell a complete weapons parts kit. The response from the ATF is that in response to some commenters who expressed confusion concerning footnote of the comment period as to what conduct is acceptable with respect to the sale or distribution of weapons parts kits or aggregations of firearms parts, the department reiterates that Title whatever of the code includes federal felony violations that can apply to circumstances involving the final rules requirements. These include criminal prohibitions on engaging in the business of importing, manufacturing, or dealing in firearms without a license, engaging in the business of importing or manufacturing ammunition without a license, aiding and abetting or causing such conduct to occur, and conspiring with another to engage in such conduct. Additionally, persons who manufacture and sell unassembled weapons or weapons parts kits in knockdown condition, unassembled but complete as to all component parts, cannot structure transactions to avoid paying a federal or firearms excise tax on their sales price. In sum, persons cannot undermine the requirements and prohibitions by working with others or structuring transactions to avoid the appearance that they are not commercially manufacturing and distributing firearms. These pauses are me scrolling past a lot of boilerplate and stuff. The next section is Stifles Technological Innovation. Comments received. Several commenters opposed the comment period because they believed it would discourage technological innovation and ignored the realities of the design and engineering process. Commenters stated that companies or new entrants to the market will generally manufacture in accordance with safe-harbored products identified within the proposed definitions because they fear the risk of non-compliance and the resulting potential for liability. The ATF's response: the department disagrees that the rule will stifle innovation. Because of this rule, licensees will have a better understanding of which portion of the weapon is the frame or receiver with respect to current and new designs, and will be able to mark those firearms without seeking guidance from ATF. That's stupid. By providing much needed clarity as to what a frame or receiver, ATF is encouraging innovation by providing a framework under which new ideas and technology can develop. In the advancement of split and modular firearms design in which components may become separated, these updates are necessary to identify firearms for inventory control and to allow tracing. To alleviate the cost and add to the associated licensee information on existing firearms or receivers, the final rule requires only new designs, those are functionally modified or altered, to be identified with the associated licensee's name, city, and state or serial number, or alternatively, the licensee's name and the serial number beginning with the abbreviated licensee number as a prefix to the unique identification number. Again, under this final rule, there would only be one frame or receiver of a given weapon. So that's their answer. Next one is it does not enhance public safety. Thousands of commenters opposed to the changes in the new rules, arguing that the new rules do not enhance public safety and that adding the serial numbers will do nothing to reduce crime. The commenter stated that ATF presented no evidence that definitively links firearms part serialization with statistically significant violent crime reduction and failed to show the evidence that serialized firearms clearly assist in law enforcement investigations that result in the return of stolen, lost firearms. Commenters opposed to the rule claim that the personally made firearms or ghost guns are not generally used in by criminals because they're too expensive to build, and the firearms make their way into hands of criminals through theft or other activity. In the experience of at least one commenter, 3D printing of firearms can be a time-intensive process where a single print of a handgun can take anywhere from 48 to 72 hours to finish. Further, it can take several tries to get a print done, which could take a period of several days. This time investment, in the commenter's opinion, makes it less likely that criminals are using 3D printers to create firearms they intend to use in crimes. Further, commenters wrote that even if ATF required markings on personally made firearms, it is well known that criminals simply obliterate serial numbers. Numerous commenters also pointed to ATF's motion to dismiss the California versus ATF lawsuit. Pointed to the ATF's motion to dismiss the California versus ATF lawsuit, where the state of California asked the federal court to direct ATF to vacate its determinations that unfinished pistol frames and receivers are not subject to the same regulations as other firearms, and to directly classify so-called 80% frames as firearms subject to the firearm statutes and regulations. Man, that's unnecessarily wordy. For paraphrasing ATF's arguments from the agency's motion to dismiss, commenters stated that the ATF argued 8 such crimes out of the 1.1 million violent crimes committed in the relevant 6-year period is a far cry from an overwhelming wave that would cause a state of injury sufficient to confer standing. Nor can California plausibly plead that those crimes could not have occurred with traditional serialized firearms. You know why I'm so good at reading that? Because I read that a lot in the comment periods. That is a Tetris block, but a good one. It's one that we put out there. Likewise, commenters also took issue with the data that ATF presented in the new rules regarding the 24,000 privately made guns submitted for tracing from 2016, the 4-year period from 2016 to 2020. They stated that ATF needed to provide context for the data it presented. They claimed the data presented is not sufficient to demonstrate that personally made firearms are actually used in crimes, and that the ATF has been able to only argue that suspected PMFs, personally made firearms, were reported to be present in potential crime scenes. Further, they opined that the personally made firearms recovered might actually involve hundreds of factory-made firearms with the serial numbers removed. Other commenters countered ATF's data by citing Bureau of Justice Statistics publication to try to show that criminals do not use kit guns. A lot of reference here. In that survey, 287,000 surveyed prisoners had possessed a firearm during their offense. This is a survey from 2016. Among those, more than half, 56%, had stolen, 6% found at the crime scene, and 7% obtained it on the streets from the underground market. Oh, I got that all wrong. Among these, half had stolen it, 6 had found it, 7 had obtained it on the street. Oh, I see. And then the underground black market, 43%. That's the shitty way to present data. I mean, everybody knows not to present data that way. Most of the remainder, 25%, had obtained it from family member or a friend as a gift. The report said only 7% of felons surveyed purchased their firearms legally through an FFL. In sum, commenters claim that the new rules is a solution in search of a problem and is not addressing an actual problem. This is the stupid ATF's response to all of that, because that was some of the best stuff that was put in the comment periods, but I'm not commenting. As discussed in Section 2A of this preamble, the submission of personally made firearms reported for tracing by law enforcement is increasing at an exponential rate, especially over the last 3 years, which is more recent than that survey from 2016 relied on by your comments. Further, unlike commercially produced firearms, it is difficult for licensees to account for these personally made firearms in their inventories and to report thefts or losses to law enforcement and to insurance companies. The current technology for making firearms, including 3D printing, is continually improving, and the ATF and the department and the ATF have authority and obligation to promulgate regulations to implement the Gun Control Act in light of the public safety goals of that statute. Ugh. The department disagrees that personally made firearms can statistically be compared to firearms that have undergone background checks, or with firearms recovered that have been marked with serial numbers and other identifying information. As explained in this rule, personally made kit guns are assembled from parts without background checks. They are not yet being acquired through the primary market in quantities like commercially. Oh, come on. Then, so there's so many of them that you have to do rules, but there's not enough of them that you actually have to listen to this comment. I'm not commenting. But they are easily acquired by persons prohibited by law from receiving or possessing firearms, and therefore they pose a significant threat to public safety. Moreover, so there's no like they may present, they do present. So therefore pose, oh man, I'm trying not to comment. Moreover, unlike other firearms recovered by law enforcement, personally made firearms are far more difficult for law enforcement to trace when recovered at a crime scene because they lack serial numbers and other identifying markings. With the advancement of firearms technology, personal kits will over time eventually make their way into primary markets as those become more reliable and when they can be marketed broadly, pawned, or repaired. That's their answer. To all of that stuff, their answer is, oh, we're scared. Oh, we're scared. And your data is 4 years old. All our data is way older than that, but your data is 4 years old. I'm not commenting though. Tracing efforts hindered. This seems to me like this is a tree that's growing with a crazy trunk that like shifted 4 feet and then started growing into a tree. You don't even have to chop this one down. You just have to go push on it. This whole thing is garbage. Tracing efforts hindered. Don't get scared because we're going to talk about how tracing might not be perfect. Commenters asserted that the new rules will not enhance public safety because the new requirements will only make it more confusing for law enforcement officers when tracing firearms. Commenters stated that criminals could simply acquire 2 copies of the same model, interchange or swap parts, which would send law enforcement on a wild goose chase. What? The commenter stated that individuals typically swap out upper and lower assemblies to alternate calibers or to use different barrels, which would lead to more than one serial number on the firearm. In these cases, an officer may find 2 or 3 different serial numbers and submit all the numbers to the ATF for tracing, which would require ATF to contact multiple manufacturers, distributors, and retailers, and possibly multiple transferees who purchase firearms. The department agrees. Oh, this is the stupid ATF's response to that. The department agrees with the commenters who said that under the proposed rule, law enforcement might find it more difficult to trace firearms with more than one serial number. For this reason, the final rule accepts commenters' suggestions asserting that the term framer receiver should be defined to mean only one single, is that damn Tetris block again, one single housing with one unique serial number that is not duplicated on any other firearm. The department agrees with commenters that doing so will be less costly for the licensees to mark and record and for law enforcement to trace firearms involved in crime. Therefore, the department has defined the term framer receiver to focus only on the part that is marked on a particular weapon or frame or silencer. In the case of a multi-piece frame or receiver, however, the final rule makes clear that if there are 2 more similar subparts that make up a multi-piece frame or receiver, then those 2 subparts would be marked with the same serial number and associated licensee information. Therefore, there should be very few circumstances in which there are more than one unique serial number placed on a weapon. What assholes. So they just said that all firearms today are multi-piece frames or receiver, and because now just all guns with multi-piece frames or receivers have to have this, therefore there'll be fewer circumstances. That's not even logic. That's just plain just writing whatever you want, and nobody reads this, so they can just say whatever they want in here, I think. I'm not commenting, though. There should be very few circumstances in which there are more than one unique serial number placed on a weapon. Remanufactured or imported firearms where the manufacturer imports chooses their own marked serial number rather than adopting the existing serial number. Whatever. Next is punishes law-abiding citizens. They don't care about this. Numerous commenters objected that the new rules, because they believed it would turn law-abiding citizens into felons, it would only serve to punish hobbyists who build their own firearms. Concerned that firearms in their possession would have more than one frame or receiver and therefore would need more than one part marked, commenters opposed to the rule expressed concern that they would be automatic felons once the regulation becomes effective. For instance, commenters stated if the upper AR-15 is considered a receiver under the rules, then thousands of law-abiding citizens who own these receivers become felons overnight. The commenter similarly questioned whether they would have violated the NFA or GCA if they sell or purchase an unmarked partially completed weapons parts kits after the final rule is enacted. The department disagrees that this rule turns law-abiding citizens into felons and only serves to punish hobbyists who build their own firearms. Nothing in this rule prevents unlicensed law-abiding citizens and hobbyists from making their own firearms by using commercially produced parts or by using 3D printers, or from transferring personally made firearms to others as long as they are not engaged in the business or activity requiring a license. If such persons wish to engage in the business of manufacturing, importing, or dealing in firearms, they must obtain a license like any other manufacturer, importer, or dealer. Of course, private manufacturers must abide by the Undetectable Firearms Act, NFA requirements, and any applicable state and local laws that govern privately made firearms. With regard to commenters' assertion that there would be more than one frame or receiver on a given weapon, this final rule does not define that a term in a manner that would result in more than one on a particular weapon. Wow, they didn't add their stupid page and a half of boilerplate right there. They must have gotten tired of cutting and pasting. So next one is impacts on underserved and minority communities. Numerous commenters asserted that I got a drink, hold on. Numerous commenters asserted that the new rules is racist and would negatively impact the poor and minority communities. They requested that the rule either be rescinded or that a racial equality analysis be conducted to prevent any racially discriminatory outcomes. These types of commenters stated, for example, that's freaking weird. They'd never have ever said these types of commenters before, except for in this sentence, in this paragraph. These types of commenters stated, for example, that the requirements for serial numbers will disproportionately impact the poor, elderly, and minorities and will place the nation's citizens at increased risk from criminals. Other commenters stated their belief that the rule will result in more Black Americans being arrested, prosecuted, and incarcerated, and thus will harm already vulnerable communities. Another commenter contended the proposed rule is at odds with the president's equality initiatives in that Although the administration is considering equality and pursuing policy changes to education, employment, and housing, this policy of promoting equality should also include firearms equality or firearms equity. The commenter indicated that increased costs to gun manufacturers under this proposal would not only affect small businesses, but would also have a disparate impact on low-income citizens who are disproportionately persons of color, according to the commenter. Accordingly, the commenter said that ATF must provide data and a comprehensive analysis to prove that the new rules do not unfairly and inequitably penalize any racial or ethnic group nor harm any protected civil rights class. Further, the commenter argued that the ATF should seek to increase gun affordability for low-income citizens and increase gun ownership among disadvantaged people. So this is stupid ATF's response to that. The department disagrees that additional racial equality analysis needs to be conducted on the rule, or that this rule is consistent with equality initiatives of the administration. That's interesting. So we don't agree. The final rule implements the Gun Control Act, which regulates commerce in firearms. The Gun Control Act in part requires that all firearms manufactured, imported, and sold by FFLs or transferred through FFLs be marked with serial numbers in order to be traceable, whereas those firearms are recovered by law enforcement nationally or internationally. A firearms trace provides an investigative, what is this? Their response to challenge that this consequences of this rule are going to have impacts in low income and minority communities. They're saying, oh, let's talk about the definition of this thing again. Let's talk about how we're going to ask everybody to have serial numbers and how serial numbers are so good at tracing. How's that even an answer? A firearms trace provides an investigative lead to law enforcement regarding the identity of the unlicensed person who first purchased the firearm from a retailer, or at retail from a manufacturer, importer, or wholesale. The identification of that person does not automatically indicate that that person is a criminal. The Gun Control Act does not distinguish between communities in the United States. Further, ATF is prohibited under federal law from maintaining a registry of firearms or firearms owners, with exception to weapons under the NFA, and therefore ATF does not know who owns firearms, nor does it keep track of who builds their own kits. Accordingly, there is no way for ATF to anticipate or measure how the rule would impact particular communities based on racial or socioeconomic distinctions. That's literally Anyway, lastly, this is not within the scope of the Gun Control Act or the Department of ATF's purview to increase gun affordability. Oh, snap. It is not within the scope of the Gun Control Act or the Department's or ATF's purview to increase gun affordability for low-income citizens and increased gun ownership among any particular group of people. Wow, that's a rude slap in the butt, or maybe in the mouth. Holy crap, that is heinous. That's heinous. So they're challenged that the consequences of their new rule will impact portions of the community, right? Who cares how you want to divide everybody up, but it's going to have consequences. And if you unnecessarily overburden the gun shops, then those gun shops don't exist. And where are gun shops going to quit existing? In the places where they have the biggest markup and the most, I'm not commenting, but this is bullshit. Holy crap. This thing is the weakest tower I've ever seen, made out of straw and duct tape. Hopefully people don't just watch this thing and ignore it. This is easy to push over. This thing is garbage. I'm not commenting though. I'll just throw that in there. So let's see. Other priorities and efficiencies. I guess I should start making some notes here. And it sounds like my garbage is coming. So in a minute, I'm going to go grab my garbage out from the street. Well, actually, it'll be more than a minute. But I'm going to start making some notes here. Not making too much of actually, I'm going to take a break here and go look and see if that is the garbage truck or some other kind of vehicle. they're going the other way. All right, so back at it. Other priorities and efficiencies. Is that what it says? Yeah. Many commenters stated that the department and ATF should not attack law-abiding citizens, but should instead focus on real criminals and enforce the existing firearms laws. They stated that ATF should expand resources in the investigation and assistance of prosecution of weapons charges and more fully advise the courts on such technical issues. Other commenters stated that government should devote resources to solving mental health issues or combating drugs on the street. Whoa. Other commenters suggested that the government propose new sentencing guidelines for individuals who steal or utilize firearms in criminal activities rather than enact new rules that impact only law-abiding citizens. Now, there's something like 46,000 comments came in, and they decided, the Department of the ATF and under the Department of Treasury or whatever this is, decided which comments to put together. There needs to be scrutiny on how they decided to group these, because this is important and they grouped it interestingly. Is that the way to say it? I gotta go look at my garbage truck. I'll be right back. Read this paragraph again. That's a good one. Suckers, they took the whole garbage, so I'm gonna go out there and pull my thing back in. I'll be right back. You can take a break for maybe 3 minutes. Puppy, I'm getting the garbage. All right, so this is an important one because this is the mitigating factors of suicide and a lot of gun crime. Let's see how the ATF blows this off. Just as a, oh man, they're going to blow it off in one paragraph. I got to drink something. This is ridiculous. All right, so that doesn't go, don't lose the significance of this. This comment is on other priorities and efficiencies. So this is how they titled this. It's number 12 on page 243. Other comments received. Many commenters stated that the department and ATF should not attack law-abiding citizens, but should instead focus on real criminals and enforce existing firearms laws. They stated that ATF should expand resources in the investigation and assistance of prosecution of weapons charges, and more fully advise the courts on such technical issues. Other commenters stated that the government should devote resources to solving mental health issues or combating drugs on the street. Other commenters suggested that the government propose new sentencing guidelines for individuals who steal or utilize firearms in criminal activities rather than enact new rules that impact only law-abiding citizens. Be offended that they put those topics together in one paragraph, as if those things are the same, as if those things can be addressed together. And let's see how these assholes addressed that. This is the stupid ATF's response to that. The department agrees with the commenters that mental health and drugs are important issues for the government to address, but disagrees that this rule improperly diverts ATF resources. To the contrary, the rule is absolutely necessary to allow ATF to focus its resources. The rule accomplishes this goal by helping to ensure that firearms recovered from crime scenes can be traced through licensee records using the information marked on the frame or receiver of each firearm. Not only do more traceable firearms lead to increased discovery and prosecution of criminals, but they also provide ATF with key crime gun intelligence, such as firearm trafficking patterns through multiple sales reports, demand letters of licensees with a short time to crime, and theft loss reports. That's their answer to the mitigating causes of the actual consequences of violence, or what causes the gun crime. That's their answer. Gun tracing. Gun tracing is going to solve everything. This was a lot of reading, but that part right there, the end of page 243, that's one of the biggest blow-offs we've seen in this whole thing. All right, this is a pile of bullshit, and that's one of the stinkiest turds in the pile of bullshit. If there's a way to quantify this bullcrap. Next, concerns with the economic analysis, addressing externality. All right, in the new rules, ATF stated this rule would address externalities. What the hell is that? Commenters, okay, let's go figure out what this even is. And in economics, an externality or external cost is an indirect cost or benefit to an uninvolved third party that arises in an effect of another party's activity. Externalities can be considered as unpriced goods involved in either consumer or producer market transactions. So I'm externality offended when I gotta see somebody build a house on the top of a hill. That's why you can't build houses on hills. Commenters stated that externalities result from inefficiencies in market transactions. Commenters stated that ATF failed to address how criminals produce a negative externality by using an unmarked weapon when committing a crime. In addition, commenters stated that commercial activity should not be held responsible for any difficulties ATF experiences enforcing federal law. ATF concurs that this rule would not address externalities due to market inefficiencies. Therefore, to avoid any confusion, the language in the new rulings that suggested this rule would address a market inefficiency has been removed. Am I reading that right? So they're concerned that they're going to cause all kinds of ripples in the economy of the gun community or the gun industry because of their stupid rule. And they're like, oh yeah, we thought that is a point, so we decided that we're not involved in that anymore. We're just going to remove the fact that we're going to address any of that. We're just going to forget about that. That's messed up. If I'm reading that wrong, I'm reading that wrong. I could be. I'm a little loopy. Next, overall costs, comments received. Many commenters stated that the costs of the ATF that ATF attributed to the rule did not account for the full number of personally made firearms currently in circulation. They stated that there are as many as 20 million individuals or personally made kits that would be affected by this rule. In addition, one commenter suggested that The overall cost estimate in the new rules, which the commenter calculated to be 7 cents per firearm for all the firearms currently in circulation, was not a realistic cost estimate given the comprehensive changes being made to the industry as a whole. One commenter suggested that a low estimate of $45 to mark each frame should make the overall cost estimate over $100 million. Another commenter believed that the increased cost to the consumer of $5 per firearm is too low because this cost includes engraving, paperwork, retention, legal services, and engineering, all of which would be necessary to achieve compliance with the new regulations. Several commenters stated that the 20-year estimate of $1.1 million is too low. One commenter stated that if an 80% receiver or frame sells for $100, the $1.1 million estimate would mean that only 550 receivers or frames were sold per year, a number the commenter believed was impossibly low. Commenters asserted that companies would suffer substantial losses or go out of business altogether. One commenter asked if businesses would be compensated if their actual loss were above the costs estimated in the rule. Some commenters suggested that requiring multiple serial numbers would also be cost prohibitive for manufacturers and make the rule economically significant. A commenter suggested that the manufacturing costs alone would be at least $400 million. Many commenters stated that the ATF failed to compile data on unfinished receivers and kit sales, and that the ATF did not know how commerce would be affected by the rule change. One commenter stated that to comply with the new regulations, companies would need to seek legal advice and train employees on the regulations and form changes, which would exceed the cost of $10 per company. The commenter wanted to know if the ATF had considered how higher demand for determinations would affect the agency and the manufacturers awaiting those determinations. Additionally, this commenter wanted to know if ATF had considered the cost of federal, state, and local agencies to train law enforcement to recognize items now classified as receivers and the increased workload on the ATF to regulate firearms with multiple frames or receivers. One commenter stated that some individuals must drive long distances to reach an FFL. These trips are expensive and time-consuming. Another commenter stated that the cost estimate for individuals was too low because it failed to consider the time and transportation cost to travel to an FFL to transfer parts, such as upper receiver or pistol slides, which the commenter believed would be required to be serialized under the rule. Keep in mind what they're grouping together, what they consider to be similar, and how they're addressing these issues that were brought up in the 450,000 comments or something. All right, ATF, stupid answer to that is ATF agrees the costs of the rule did not account for personally made kits currently owned by law-abiding individuals, but this is cool because the rule does not affect individuals in possession of kits unless the individual tries to sell or otherwise dispose of the kit through an FFL. ATF cannot agree with the commenter that there may be up to 20 million privately made kits in private circulation because ATF does not maintain any data that would allow for an estimate of the number of kits. In any event, kits by definition are not serialized by FFLs. All right, whatever, and would only need to be serialized if the individual with the kit transfers it to an FFL. Nonetheless, ATF significantly revised its economic analysis in the preparing of the final rule to better reflect the rule's impact on those affected populations. Where feasible, the department has reduced some of the burdens on the regulated community. Rather than requiring multiple serial numbers, the final rule amends the proposed definition of frame or receiver to identify one part of a firearm to be the frame or receiver. That requires a serial number, with the exception of a multi-piece frame or receiver that are composed of multiple modular subparts, which require placement of the same serial number and associated licensing information on those parts. Because there will almost always be one serial number per firearm under the final rule, no federal, state, or local costs were considered for law enforcement to review firearms with multiple serial numbers. ATF concurs with the comment that entities will need to provide training to employees to ensure compliance with when any new regulations are published. However, ATF disagrees that these costs should be considered under the rule. Activities such as training employees and obtaining legal opinions in response to new regulations of this type are usual activities for complying with the regulatory requirements in this industry and are not treated as new costs associated with this rule. where manufacturers have been granted determination letters. So that's basically a cost of doing business. You have to deal with us. That's just a cost of doing business, sucker. So where manufacturers have been granted determined letter, that was actually in there. I didn't even add that. That was just in there. When manufacturers have been granted determination letters for their firearms design, these designs have been grandfathered to be excluded from the final rule, except for these determinations that a frame or receiver had not reached a stage of manufacture to be classified as a frame or receiver. Due to these changes in the revised definitions under the final rule, ATF does not anticipate that manufacturers and retailers of currently regulated firearms will incur significant costs from the publication of this final rule. Let's take a moment and remember that if they suggest that everything going forward needs a serial number in order for safety, and everyone is like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea, why the hell would you not think that 5 minutes from now they're going to go, you know what's not safe? All those guns that don't have serial numbers. So this grandfather bullshit is, we'll catch you later. We'll catch you next time. Whenever it says grandfather, think in next week they're coming after that. Like, this doesn't work. Serial numbers can't be safe if half the guns don't have serial numbers. What the hell? Don't get mad at the fact that this is happening. Realize that it's like getting mad at the grass growing. There's going to be unscrupulous people that want to offend, and there's going to be people that can throw a rock at glass. Getting mad at that is one thing. You can not make the glass, or you can just cut the grass, man. So don't get too mad at this shit, but it's heinous. It's super heinous. This is nothing but poop. Affected populations. Next one is, one commenter suggested that the ATF underestimated the overall number of the affected populations because the number of public comments received on the proposed rule was more than the number of affected entities listed in the thing. One commenter stated that the total affected population should include all businesses that sell firearms components, not just makers of unfinished frames or receiver. One commenter stated that the ATF failed to include the micro-scale businesses that specialize in firearms customization for marksmanship competitions, and that many small businesses that sell semi-automatic pistol sights and accessories, which they believe would be reclassified as firearms by the final rule, would need to become licensed dealers or manufacturers. Many commenters stated that regulatory impact analysis did not account for the costs incurred by individuals. Many commenters estimated a total number of personally made kits already in circulation and estimated that the cost for these currently in circulation would be millions of dollars. Some commenters stated that the new rules should have included an estimate on the number of personally made kits and unfinished receivers that would be reclassified as firearms. Multiple commenters stated that there were millions of firearms produced prior to 1968 that are not serialized, and that requiring application of serial number to those firearms would lower their value. Commenters estimated that approximately 300 million firearms would need to be serialized under the new rule, and that the time frame to serialize these firearms under the proposed rule would be unreasonably short. Other commenters estimated approximately 3 million of these kits would need to be marked under the rule. For these kits, they estimated the costs associated marking and transferring to be $180 million, which is what, $6 a kit? That's crazy. This is the ATF's response to all of that. ATF disagrees that, you want to know what they're going to say? They're going to go, we're not going to call them receivers, so you don't have to worry about that. And we grandfathered everything, so you don't got to worry about that. Those are the two Tetris box we're going to see. ATF disagrees that the number of entities affected by the rule is the same or similar to the number of individuals who have commented on the proposed rule. The Small Business Administration considers small entities to be businesses, not governmental organizations. Non-governmental organizations or small governmental jurisdictions, not individuals. The estimated number of entities affected by the rule will be significantly smaller than the number of individuals who commented on the rule or who currently possess privately made firearms. Under the final rule, privately made firearms owned by individuals who do not have to be serialized unless the personally made firearm is transferred to an FFL and the FFL voluntarily accepts the thing into inventory. At the time of the rules, ATF assumed that the individuals who own these kits would likely choose to avoid going to an FFL when disposing of their firearms to avoid serializing their kits. For the final rule, ATF outlines the individual populations and costs if individuals choose to take their kits to an FFL and if that kit is accepted into inventory. In addition, neither the new rules nor this final rule define privately made firearms as including firearms manufactured or made prior to the 68, and this rule does not affect pre-68 firearms that were not serialized unless remanufactured after that date. Yet, ATF does not account for the cost of two entities. And why am I saying that? Oh, this slippery slope argument is bogus, except this is the slippery slope. This is the you don't have enough serial numbers. What's after you don't have enough serial numbers? You don't have enough serial numbers on enough guns. So come on, man. ATF did not account for these costs to entities that specialize in firearms customization for marksmanship competitions because the changes to the final rules definition of frame or receiver would not change the ability of these micro-scale businesses to customize firearms by replacing slides and accessories. Under the final rule, these items would not be considered frames or receivers. Therefore, these businesses would not be required to be licensed as manufacturers if they customize firearms by replacing pistols, slides, and accessories for individual unlicensed customers. Very, very specific answer to that, because obviously if they stippled a frame, they would need to be. So messed up. Definition of frame or receiver. This is page 250. Many commenters stated that having firearms with multiple serial numbers would be cost prohibitive. Some commenters suggested that should manufacturers have to mark multiple serial numbers, retooling designs would cost a significant amount of money. No, that didn't work. We got a poll going over there, 10 votes on who thinks who's going to be the most effective with their approach to illuminating people about this one. Let's see. Many commenters stated having would be cost prohibitive. Some commenters suggested that manufacturers who have to mark retooling designs would cost a significant amount of money and investment. They also asserted manufacturers would have to spend time and money to match up the firearms pieces into one firearm. Some commenters suggested that this would increase the cost of firearms for purchasers. Other commenters stated that the industry would need to change how it marks, sells, and advertises unfinished receivers that would be considered firearms under the final rule. Commenters stated that the new regulations requiring multiple parts to be serialized would harm both citizens and the firearms industry by limiting growth and innovation in the industry. One commenter stated that the industry would be forced to seek determinations from the ATF because manufacturers would be unable to determine which part of the firearm is frame receiver. Other commenters stated that the firearm... I can't read that fast. Hold on. I thought I had it at a good speed, but that was way too fast. It was like being in reading class or something. No, that's way too slow. So, okay. Well, that's way too fast. One commenter stated that restricting parts on the firearm company could, parts of the firearm that a company could sell would cause a shift in supply and demand. One commenter asserted that the cost estimates did not align with how the manufacturing process works. The commenter claimed that to comply with the rule, manufacturers would have to totally rework their manufacturing process and record-keeping systems. One commenter stated that companies that produce... Oh, that didn't work. Dang it. Where was I? 250? I'm like 4 pages. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll with the thing to make it like scroll for me, and it's not working good. I think I messed up. So some commenters suggested it would cost more to purchase individual pieces because they would now have to go through FFLs to purchase their firearms kits and pay a transfer fee for each frame or receiver they purchase. One commenter asked if there would be enough FFLs to serialize firearms in the required time period, asked how individuals with disabilities or without transportation would visit an FFL to have their firearms serialized, and asked if individuals would be reimbursed for unserialized firearms seized by the government. Based on and this is the ATF's, stupid ATF's response to all this. Based on the public comments received, the final rule changes the proposed definition of firearms receiver to identify only one part of a firearm that will need to be marked. However, if the company were to sell a firearms parts kit with a partially complete receiver or a multi-piece firearms or receiver where there is more than one modular subpart, the frames or receivers of these items will now need to be serialized in accordance with this rule, increasing the cost of these items. ATF acknowledges that the proposed regulation would have posed some compliance issues for manufacturers and that some companies that were not FFLs would have needed to become FFLs under the proposed rule. ATF modified the rule to alleviate these concerns by expressly excluding raw materials by further clarifying certain items, and allowing manufacturers to adopt existing marks of identification in several circumstances. Not even that far into it, and I'm already getting all messed up. Further, retailers were required under the new rules and are required under the final rule to mark only unserialized firearms that they currently have in inventory and any personal kits that they take into inventory after the implementation of the final rule. In this regard, licensees will continue to have 60 days until after the effective date of the final rule to serialize the firearms parts kits with partially complete frames or receivers they currently have in inventory. ATF concurs that individuals will now need to visit an FFL to purchase those firearms parts kits with partially complete frames or receivers that may be readily completed like other firearms. However, because there will only be one frame or receiver per kit, there will be no additional transfer fees, except for the one that there wasn't before. Firearms kits with partially complete frames or receivers. ATF received various comments regarding the methodology used for determining populations and costs for non-FFL manufacturers of partially complete frames or receivers and firearms kits. Several commenters treated the manufacturers and retails of these items as one group and stated that the population estimated by the ATF was too low. One commenter claimed that the ATF misstated the number of non-FFLs selling firearms parts kits with a partially complete firearms frame or receiver because an internet search of the commenter conducted on 80% returned more than 75 websites selling these items. Many commenters asserted that the ATF could not properly determine how much of an effect on commerce this rule would have for manufacturers. Some commenters stated that ATF did not account for non-FFL manufacturers becoming licensed. Other commenters claimed that the new regulations would ruin non-FFL businesses that sell unregulated parts. One commenter opined that non-FFL manufacturers are not likely to become licensed in that because most of the companies are small, this final rule will force those companies to go out of business. One commenter stated that the ATF did not account for lost revenue and increased expenses for gunsmiths, companies producing firearms kits, and individuals. Some public commenters stated that non-FFLs would be unable to become licensed either because of the costs of becoming licensed or zoning restrictions, and that the ATF did not account for companies going out of business. Let's talk about state laws while we're at it. Commenters stated that ATF did not estimate the impact on revenue this rule would have on the public, and ATF assumptions were unsupported. One commenter stated that the ATF made a flawed assumption that there would be no cost because non-FFL manufacturers would choose not to become licensed because of the primary marketing scheme of some of these non-FFL manufacturers. The commenter claimed that even if only a few of these manufacturers chose to become licensed, the cost would be in the millions. Another commenter similarly stated that there was no analysis or evidence presented on non-FFLs choosing to become licensed or foregoing selling new regulated items. One commenter stated the ATF failed to estimate the number of parts kits and personal kits that did not quantify the total cost for destroying on returning in such items. Additionally, the commenter stated that ATF failed to explain how it arrived at the conclusion that all non-FFL retailers would choose to destroy their inventory of unmarked parts kits. One commenter stated that according to the parts kits and some unfinished receivers currently available will no longer be sold. This commenter asked if what is this RIA again? Assumed that all non-licensed manufacturers will produce kits with uniform blocks of metal. Oh, is that no, I don't know what that is. The commenter believed that sales of such kits would be lower than sales of existing kits because it would take more skill and additional tools to transform the new kits into frames or receivers. One commenter stated that ATF failed to provide an analysis of the exact amount of revenue per businesses that non-FFL retailers would lose if they choose to sell parts kits without unfinished receivers. One commenter stated that the assumption in the something was that the kits without a frame or receiver would not be regulated, but the text of the proposed rule did not make this clear. A couple of commenters stated that ATF's assumption that 10% of the FFLs out there currently deal in firearms parts kits with a partially complete frame or receiver have only 2 such items in inventory. in inventory lacked any supporting evidence or data and cited only unknown subject matter experts. Several commenters suggested that the populations, cost assumptions, and descriptions for in-house engraving were inaccurate. One commenter stated the engraving equipment is not common at FFLs. One commenter suggested that only viable means of engraving with the laser engraver, associated equipment, and safety supplies with a specialized worker. Several commenters suggested the labor and equipment needed to engrave existing inventory is significantly higher than the stamping method discussed in the rules. Another commenter stated that the costs in the ATF's analysis were underestimated and questioned how ATF came to the conclusions about the number of FFLs that have parts kits, who would mark their kits and how they'd be marked, and why kits that do not need to be serialized would have an embedded, that now need to be serialized, would have an embedded metal plate onto which to mark the serial number. The commenter also noted that ATF did not include a cost estimate for the 36 non-FFL dealers who have their parts kits marked by a licensee. One commenter stated the ATF estimate of a one-time cost of contracting out gunsmithing services in order to mark inventory that would need to be serialized was unsupported by evidence or data. Here's a stupid ATF's response to all that. The ATF partially concurs that the population of affected dealers of firearms parts kits with partially complete frames or receivers was underestimated. The new rules, ATF found 71 companies selling such parts kits. Because the requirements for manufacturers and retailers are different, ATF accounts them separately and in different chapters of the thing, which makes the numbers per chapter lower than the population estimate suggested by commenters. So we grouped them differently so that we can send them whatever number we want. Although all 71 companies sell firearms parts kits with a partially complete frame or receiver, ATF broke up the number of companies between manufacturers and dealers of kits. After receiving comments, ATF performed a second internet search of companies and found an additional 58. Oh yeah, we had said there was 34, but now we found 58 more. But broke those up into 4 groups: FFL and non-FFL, FFL and non-FFL dealers. Nice. By categorizing the companies this way, we can have whatever numbers we want. I mean, the population numbers appear to be relatively low in each chapter of the thing, but overall numbers, the companies affected, is similar to what we thought we may, or whatever, the total number of companies suggested by the commenter. For the final thing, ATF revised the methodology and costs associated with this final rule to incorporate the costs that the commenter suggested will arise. ATF concurs that lost revenue was not accounted for in the proposed rule, and the final rule now incorporates both the loss in revenue for companies and additional expenses for individuals. Under the final rule, firearms parts kits with partially complete frames or receivers will no longer be able to be sold without a serial number. The thing revised estimates to assume that firearms parts kits with partially complete frames or receivers will be regulated. What is RIA? I gotta go figure out what the heck this is. It said it up here and I blew it off because I thought they were just saying it once, and then it turns out they're going to use it like 1,000 times. Come on, seriously, why are they making it such a pain in the butt? Oh, because it's them, and this is how they obfuscate and deceive and hide in the bureaucracy and win through attrition. So the way that you fight people that are trying to win through attrition, how did we win the Revolutionary War? Because soldiers came in straight lines, attrition, come in lines, battle lines, you know, fire till you see the whites of their eyes, garbage. You flank them. You come in and pop, attack and strafe. You leave, cut and go. So we need many people biting into this all over. They couldn't have given us a fatter ham to eat, to feed off of. It's probably a trap. But if you're going to eat the bait, you might as well get some nourishment and learn something. So why can't I find this stupid thing? The RIA. All right, I guess I'm just going to ignore it. It has to be in here somewhere. I'm not going to do it this way. Control F, RIA, and then just go up until I find the damn thing. Come on. Okay, regulatory impact analysis. I want to punch my refrigerator again. Stupid thing. So now I know what stupid RIA is. Try to remember that. Now I'll try to forget it. All right, so I had to go back a couple of pages to get that. I think go back down. Regulatory impact analysis. So this is their BS, like, oh, we figured out how much it's going to cost the industry. Oh, do you know what page I was on? I should have probably looked at what page I was on. Cost because non-FFLs would choose to become primary making. One commenter stated that the something inventory analysis parts kits and some inventory would be available, no longer be sold. One commenter stated failed to provide analysis in number of, okay, then this, several commenters suggested that the populations, one commenter suggested cost of the ATF. All right, I'm going to start here again. Several commenters suggested, we're on page 254, whatever. Several commenters suggested that the population's cost assumptions and descriptions for in-house engraving were inaccurate. One commenter stated that the engraving equipment was not common at FFL. So no, we definitely said that before. 36, here's the ATF's response. ATF partially concurs that the population affected, oh no, we read all this already. So for the final ruling of the inventory analysis, revise the methodology and costs associated with this rule to incorporate the costs that commenter suggested will arise. ATF concurs that the lost revenue was not accounted for in the proposed rule. Let's see, in response to the commenter's assumption that lack any detailed methodology or otherwise unsupported, ATF reiterates that the agency does not maintain consolidated or aggregated records on companies' inventory, regardless of whether the inventory item in question is regulated, nor can ATF interview all manufacturers to determine their intended future actions upon publication of a final rule. Moreover, most of the items in companies' inventories are not currently regulated. ATF has made reasonable estimates based on information provided by commenters, willing participants in informational surveys, and ATF subject matter experts. So this willing participant in informational surveys was a comment period that we had that very few people participated in. Information provided by commenters is the hundreds of thousands that we're reading about right now. And then the subject matter experts, I'm gonna put that in my notes. Who determines who that is? Is that the ladies of the DC project? Is that people from NSSF? Or is it people that Bloomberg pays? Let's keep going. In the new rules, ATF relied on subject matter experts from the Firearms Industry Programs Branch. Oh, I guess it tells you right there. To provide an estimated population of the number of firearms kits with partially complete frames or receivers in inventory. However, because such parts kits are not viewed by industry members as regulated, and because ATF does not have the inventory data that FFLs maintain, ATF is unable to obtain estimates at the level of accuracy required by requested by public commenters. Seriously. I don't think they were asking for the inventory, ATF. They were skeptical that you have any idea what you're talking about and that you can't justify your positions, ATF. They weren't asking you for more authority or influence over gun shops' inventories. Sorry, I'm not trying to comment, but come on, man. However, to improve on these estimates for the final rule, ATF relied on general observations from its field divisions to estimate population and inventory. This was determined to be the best information available for the analysis. Next, ATF concurs with commenters that the costs associated with the in-house engraving methods outlined in the new rules were inaccurate. The ATF has changed its assumptions that considered only FFLs that currently have gunsmiths on staff. ATF estimates a one-time contracting cost for gunsmithing services to account for FFLs that have firearm permit parts kits with partially complete frame or receiver currently in inventory but do not have gunsmithing capabilities. ATF made this assumption based on anecdotal commentary from various ATF field division offices as well as comments on the new rules. Most FFLs do not have gunsmiths on staff. Therefore, it is unlikely that they will purchase engraving equipment if the staff and equipment are not already part of their normal operations. It is not clear that only FFLs with gunsmithing capabilities will carry firearms parts kits with a partially complete frame or receiver. Therefore, ATF assumed that a portion of the population will need to get to contract for gunsmithing services. As for purchasing a laser engraver, associated equipment, and safety supplies and labor, ATF used information about such costs to illustrate engraving expenses for manufacturers. ATF disagrees that a licensed dealer will need to purchase such equipment or hire more employees with the requisite engraving skills because future firearms parts kits with a partially complete primary receiver will be serialized by a licensed manufacturer and not the licensed dealer. I'm trying not to comment and trying. ATF concurred that this did not account for costs from serializing parts kits made from polymer materials. In order to account for these costs, ATF has now included costs for disposing of such items if they cannot be serialized. You can just destroy those if you can't do what we want. ATF also concurs that the cost for non-FFL dealers to serialize was omitted from the analysis and therefore has incorporated such costs into its revised BS. So basically, they're just going to now tell you a bigger number that it's going to cost you to destroy all your inventory. They're not changing anything. They're just going to give you a better number of how much you're going to be destroying. All right, gunsmithing. ATF received numerous comments on gunsmiths. Commenters, including a licensed manufacturer that operates as a small business, stated the rule will have a major impact on the businesses by increasing the cost of gunsmithing services and record-keeping requirements. The licensee claimed that the resulting decrease in profitability will affect the company's ability to expand and asserted the new regulations would complicate the process of performing a quick activity such as bore sighting or adjustments because the firearm must be recorded into the A&D records and the firearm must be marked with a serial number. This licensee also stated that many gunsmiths perform services that do not involve engraving and that these FFLs would need to expand their services or lose business. One commenter stated that persons should not have to be licensed to provide marking on firearms for non-licensees because the responsibility of the FFL to ensure that the firearm has been marked per regulation. The commenter also argued that licensing would increase costs without adding any benefits. Additionally, this commenter believed that ATF used the incorrect occupational code for slavery and salary and wages in the whatever marketing thing or inventory analysis, and the more precise code as a higher labor rate. One commenter described the significant burden and expense a gunsmith in training would endure to acquire the parts necessary to build 30 different firearms. Whoa. The commenter explained that the parts purchased online would need to be transferred through an FFL, which involves fees for completion of the Form 4473, and a second trip to the FFL would be required after the 10-day waiting period in his location. Right on, gunsmith student. One commenter asked if an explanation regarding the one-time cost for contract gunsmithing estimated to be $180,000 and the $45,000 listed in chapters whatever of the inventory analysis. This commenter asserted that the ATF underestimated the number of record entries that gunsmiths would need to make and the cost of making these entries. The commenter argued that the hourly wage used for the calculation is out of date because the cost of labor has increased. One commenter suggested there was a discrepancy regarding contract gunsmithing. Another commenter worried that ATF significantly underestimated the activities for gunsmithing and did not understand why the number of items needing to be serialized was so low. One commenter did not agree with the ATF's assessment of the inventory analysis that 3,359 gunsmiths would outsource their firearms to another FFL, or 359 FFLs would outsource their firearms to another FFL for gunsmithing work. It's a stupid number. Here's the stupid ATF's response to all that. ATF affirms that the current A&D record requirements need to be maintained whenever firearms are acquired in inventory. The final rule clarifies that Type 1 and Type 2 FFLs that do gunsmithing work, that includes marking services for non-licensees, are required to apply for a 7 manufacturer's license. Nice. ATF reiterates that person-made firearms for personal use are not required by the Gun Control Act or this rule to be serialized unless required by state or local law. Instead, serialization is required only for those that are taken into inventory, which is that the final rule clarifies based on the ATF's longstanding view does not include same-day adjustments or repairs. Because repairs are performed by gunsmiths, ATF assumes that only FFLs that are gunsmiths or hire gunsmiths will be performing repairs or customizations on personally made guns. So ATF incorporates the annual cost for these FFLs. As stated by various public commenters and reinforced by the ATF subject matter experts, not all FFL dealers are capable of engraving, therefore may be FFLs that outsource their existing inventory of firearms parts kits with a partially complete frame or receiver to another FFL or non-FFL that has engraving services available under the FFL's direct supervision. Come on. Existing personally made firearms currently in inventory are not required to be marked under the FFL's direct supervision so long as the marking occurs within 60 days from the effective date of the rule or final disposition, whichever is sooner. As for the expected populations, because such parts kits are not currently viewed by their manufacturers or members of the public as regulated, ATF is not able to definitively determine the number of affected items that would need to be serialized with the specific specificity that the commenters requested. So we just don't know. That's your problem. Silencers. One commenter stated that ATF underestimated the cost to serialize all parts of a silencer, while another commenter stated that the benefits of adding additional serialized parts of a silencer do not outweigh the costs. One commenter asked if ATF would pay for replacements of parts. One commenter believed that multiple parts of a silencer would be classified as the frame or receiver. The commenter also claimed that every silencer manufacturer would need to request a variance and the ATF did not include the cost of processing variances. One commenter asked if ATF would be covering the cost of a silencer part if it's damaged while the serial number is being marked. That's cool. Additionally, the commenter wanted to know who would pay to have the silencer parts marked if all the parts needed to be marked. And here's the stupid ATF's response to all that. In both the proposed and final rule, the ATF required or requires only that the frame or receiver of the firearm or muffler silencer be marked. And the final rule makes clear with which parts in the frame or receiver of a modular silencer. Additionally, the final rule makes clear that the end cap of a silencer or sound suppressor cannot be a frame or receiver. Based on the public comments received by the comment period for silencers and whatever, the final rule will not significantly change the way the industry currently marks silencers. In most cases, the frame or receiver would be the outer tube. Blah, blah, blah. Each person manufacturing each firearm, I don't know what all this is required to mark the firearm in accordance with the regulations and register it with the new rules. The rule, as proposed and finalized, eliminates the substantial cost of marking each and every individual internal part as described in the silencer, as well as the end cap and outer tube. Additionally, under this rule, individual internal muffler or suppressor parts may be transferred by NFA qualified manufacturers to other qualified licensees for further manufacture or repair of complete devices without an immediate registration or payment of NFA transfer tax, and complete devices that are registered may be temporarily conveyed for replacement of these internal parts. However, the term repair does not include replacement of the outer tube. The outer tube is the largest single part of a silencer, the main structural component of the silencer, and the part of which all the other components are attached. ATF has therefore taken the position that the replacement of the outer tube is so significant an event that it amounts to making a new silencer. Hence, the new silencer must be marked, registered, and transferred after payment of transfer tax in accordance with the Gun Owners Protection Act. By law, this transfer tax is owed by the transferor, not the government. Nice. So thank you, ATF. Next is privately made firearms. Markings on privately made firearms. This is page 262. We're only 100 pages away from being done. One commenter worried that requiring firearms made from parts kits to be marked would destroy their value as collector's items. One commenter stated that the loss of tax revenue due to acquisition of marking equipment was not calculated in the costs attributed to the ATF and the inventory analysis. Many commenters feared that FFLs would lose business because they do not have engraving machines and cannot work on personally made guns. Several commenters stated the cost of serializing personally made guns ranges from $35 and $400 based on whether the services include serializing alone or the related services such as cleaning, oiling, bluing, polishing, refinishing the firearm. One commenter stated that per individual costs, the inventory analysis were underestimated because the individuals tend to own more than one firearm, and the individual cost should include several handguns, at least one rifle. Another commenter claimed that the assumption the individuals will not be charged for serialization is inaccurate. What? Yeah, of course. One commenter stated that the type of low-cost hand embossing tools used for estimates of marking costs were not appropriate for marking steel or aluminum frame receivers because the depth requirement may not be met, making the markings less durable. Many commenters asserted that laser engraving machine would need to meet the marking requirements. One commenter stated that these machines cost at least $10,000 and that this type of machine is not available at most firearms retail stores. Many commenters were concerned that the estimated engraving cost of $25 is too low and suggested that the actual cost of engraving is more like $45 to $65. One commenter was also skeptical of the low cost of these privately made guns that the ATF stated were in dealers' inventories because the agency provided no evidence in how this number was determined. I guess which Tetris block they're going to throw out there. One commenter stated that the rule would reduce consumer value by reducing the number of available parts kits because it would hurt hobbyists who enjoy building their own firearms and take away the privacy of owning an unmarked firearm. One commenter said that not all FFLs have the equipment to mark firearms, and that Type 07 manufacturers that do have the equipment may not want to mark them. This commenter did not believe there are enough FFLs with the proper equipment for the number of firearms that will need to be marked. One commenter stated that the Chapter 6 of the inventory analysis did not address the costs associated with record keeping for these new guns, or these personally made guns. Here's the stupid ATF's response to all that. The ATF disagrees that it needed to calculate the loss of tax revenue due to acquiring serializing equipment. Estimating tax revenue is beyond the scope of this rule and is speculative, especially since companies are not required to purchase the equipment, much less become FFLs. ATF also disagrees that it did not properly estimate the total number of personally made guns affected by the rule or that it underestimated the number of firearms affected by the individual. Neither the proposed nor final rule requires the serialization of all fire kit guns in circulation. This aspect of the rule only affects the firearm parts kits with partially complete frames or receivers held by FFLs and personally made guns that are transferred through an FFL. Therefore, ATF only accounts for kits and personally made guns by FFLs that may go through FFLs. However, in the final analysis, ATF provides an estimate to the total number of personally made guns in circulation, along with potential cost to individuals who go through an FFL for services associated with marking their guns. FFLs are not required to acquire equipment to serialize firearms. Should they receive a personally made firearm from a non-FFL, the FFL could require the individual to serialize the personally made gun prior to the acceptance or directly oversee the engraving by another FFL or even a non-FFL. Personally made guns that may have been accepted in an inventory prior to the effective date of this rule may also be outsourced for marking to a licensed manufacturer or gunsmith within the 60-day grace period. ATF revised the estimated cost to assume those with existing gunsmith capabilities will perform engraving services in-house. FFLs without marking capabilities will either dispose of their inventory, outsource the inventory to another FFL that has the marking capabilities, or directly oversee the engraving by a non-FFL. Furthermore, if the comment period ATF assumed that the individuals with privately made guns would not choose to undertake repairs or customizations so to avoid marking requirements. Therefore, it did not anticipate these costs to individuals. Based on gunsmithing experience from subject matter experts from the Firearms Association Technology Division, most individuals seeking repairs or customizations typically do not seek bluing or other services at the same time they are seeking engraving services. ATF concurs that the analysis in the rules regarding engraving was inaccurate. ATF agrees that more likely scenarios that there may be some FFLs that sell firearms parts kits with a partially made kit or receiver that also offer gunsmithing services. These FFLs will not need to purchase embossing equipment. Rather, they can use their existing staff and equipment to serialize their existing inventory of kits. So there you go. For FFLs that do not employ gunsmiths or have existing gunsmithing equipment, ATF estimates that these FFLs will contract out engraving services to another FFL, supervise the engraving services from a non-FFL, or just dispose of their inventory. In order to simplify costs, ATF estimated only serialization from FFLs and non-FFLs being supervised by the contracting FFL. Simple, super easy. Keep track of all this. ATF concurs with commenters that there would be an additional cost for hobbyists that has updated the economic analysis accordingly. ATF revised its estimate of the cost to have multiple serial numbers on a firearm because, under the final rule, the definitions identify only one frame or receiver per firearm, and therefore the vast majority of firearms will only have one serial number per firearm. Because only one regulated part will be defined as the frame or receiver, ATF anticipates the cost would not be prohibitive for hobbyists. There you go. So they've determined it's not prohibitive for you people. Although FFLs are regulated, ATF does not have any records or data reflecting the number of weapons or frames or receiver kits with partially completed frames or receivers that FFLs may have in their inventory. Furthermore, the Paperwork Reduction Act prohibits the ATF from surveying more than 9 companies for information without going through the formal process to collect information from the public. Wow, I didn't know that. That's interesting. As stated above, let's put that in here. The Paperwork Reduction Act prevents take a quick break, I guess. As stated above, ATF revised the methodology to ascertain the number of FFLs affected by the number of firearms parts kits with a partially complete frame or receiver by relying on information from the ATF's field divisions to estimate this population, which was determined to be the best available information for the analysis. Next up is records or retention, and then first one is population. ATF received various comments regarding the population affected by the cost of record retention. Some commenters stated that the cost of shipping all firearms records to ATF was not accounted for, or that ATF estimated shipping costs was too low to account for shipments from all FFLs. Another commenter suggested that regardless of whether an FFL ships records to the ATF voluntarily, all FFLs should be accounted for, not only the ones that currently destroy their records that are 20 years old. One commenter stated that ATF should have done advance notice of proposed rulemaking to find out the number of FFLs that retained their records for more than 20 years instead of relying on subject matter estimates, expert estimates. The commenter also believed that the ATF's estimate that less than 10% or 5,400 of the dealers and collectors are not retaining their records beyond 20 years is too low because the inventory analysis lists the number of FFLs at 113,204, and 10% of this number is 11,320. So they didn't even do their math right, which is twice what was listed in the thing, the inventory analysis. And then the stupid ATF said this. The department disagrees with the commenters who said the agency underestimated the cost per FFL and that it should have taken into account the costs borne by all FFLs. Federal law already requires FFLs to send all of their out-of-business records to ATF. ATF does not consider these costs as attributable to the rule because the duty to send out-of-business records to ATF is an existing statutory and regulatory requirement. So you already had to do it, so we're not counting it. The new rules, ATF estimates that most FFLs currently store records beyond 20 years and will not be affected by the indefinite records retention requirement. Oh, man. I'm trying not to comment. I'm not doing a good job, but that's commentable. As described below, the cost burden for extending the record retention requirement, as described below, the cost burden for extending the record retention requirement. Oh, that's nice. They put the same word on top of each other so that you just read this in an endless circle if you're not paying attention. All right, the record retention requirement will affect only a subset of the number of total FFLs. Furthermore, the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, explains that the baseline for measuring a rule's cost should be what the world will be like if the proposed rule is not adopted. Holy crap, that's in law right there. Prior to the publication of the new rules, the majority of FFLs maintained records until discontinuance of business or licensed activity regardless. That means they moved their location. When they say or licensed activity, that means they moved their location. That's the only other thing you would do besides discontinue your business, regardless of whether they remained in business for 20 years or not. Because any alternative, including the proposed rule, would be a comparison against the baseline, only this incremental cost above this baseline is attributed to the rule. Man, that's shady, heinous. You decide. The 113 total number of FFLs is for all types of FFLs at the time of analysis. Records retention affects a subset of FFLs, in particular, blah, 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 because of the licensed manufacturers and blah, 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 generally maintain permanent consolidate production, acquisition, and disposition records in accordance with some other rules. Additionally, ATF estimates that licensed collectors generally maintain their records until discontinuance of license activity. At the time of the thing, there were only 60,000 type 1 and 2s, and of those, fewer than 10% were estimated to be destroying their records that were normally 20 years old. The inventory analysis for the final rule, the ATF reiterates that the records retention primarily affects the gun shops and pawn shops, and thus does not all FFLs in the overview of the analysis. So they just blew all that off. So next up is costs. Various commenters suggested that the new reporting requirements alone should have made the rule economically significant. Commenters suggested that ATF did not account for the influx of transaction records from multiple frames of receivers or the influx of transaction records from purchasers of firearms parts kits with a partially complete frame or receiver that would be disposed of as a firearm under the rule. Similarly, one commenter suggested ATF should use NICS check as a population growth models to account for the increased number of transactions and number of records in the future. One commenter suggested that in 2018, 9 million firearms were manufactured, accounting only for 9 million firearms. The cost of burden per record was estimated to be at 0.2 cents per record. One comment, or 0.02 cents per record. One commenter argued that the new rules cost estimate of $68,939 does not realistically encompass the record keeping requirements for all 79,800 and something FFLs because the number of records retained and therefore submitted will grow over time. The commenter further suggested that based on the new rules estimate of $68,900 for the entire industry, the per shipment cost for all records over 20 years would be like 86 cents per FFL, which the commenter asserted was too low. Other commenters stated that the inventory analysis estimated only additional storage costs for the ATF, but not costs to FFLs. I didn't even think about the storage cost to ATF. Of course, they're going to put it all in digital. Several commenters suggested that the new rules did not account for the increase in the number of records FFL will have to maintain due to the increased number of transactions likely to happen if a firearm has multiple serial numbers. One estimated that the record-keeping burden for ATF Forms 4473 would increase by 437 million. One commenter stated FFLs that have voluntarily retained records beyond 20 years will have a greater cost of storing records indefinitely than FFLs that destroyed or surrendered records older than 20 years because the FFLs that retain their records will overall have more records that will not need to be stored. The commenter believed that this rule will encourage FFLs to destroy records beyond 20 years prior to the change, which will hurt ATF's ability to trace firearms. One commenter estimated that it would cost the firearms industry $8.1 billion to develop and secure electronic records, and that it would cost ATF $546 million annually to maintain and support electronic storage of records. Several commenters suggested that the low records retention costs described in the inventory analysis was due to an over-reliance on savings when converting paper records to electronic storage. One commenter suggested that the cost for electronic storage should include a team of employees to create and maintain electronic storage for the FFL. One commenter suggested that ATF relied too heavily on subject matter experts for assumptions in the inventory analysis and noted that the experts' methodologies were unknown to the public. Furthermore, this commenter questioned the assumption that all FFLs would send their records older than 20 years to the ATF. One commenter suggested that the ATF consider an alternative to this requirement with a time frame between 20 years and indefinite. And then the stupid ATF said this: the department did not account for the political increase in the number of records stored due to increase in transactions recorded from multiple frames or receivers. However, this cost no longer needs to be accounted for as a result of changes to the definition of firearms frames or receiver. Nonetheless, the department concurs that there will be an increase in firearms records because there could be more firearms transactions. This could increase the overall records retention cost. There were 14 million NICS checks in 2010 and almost 40 in 2021. The cost selection of chapter whatever, the inventory analysis, ATF forecasts the estimated increase in Form 4473 applications based on the number of reported NICS checks and NFA applications by year, and estimates the increase in shipping costs for FFLs to send the records to the ATF when the business or license activity is discontinued. Under the initial inventory analysis, the $68,900 cost to retain the records beyond the existing 20-year requirement was not distributed among the 113,000 something FFLs. ATF subject matter experts report that most FFLs already retain records indefinitely beyond the existing 20-year requirement until discontinuance of business or license activities. For most FFLs, this practice is already an industry standard, and thus the cost of this practice is not attributable to this rule. Therefore, as stated in the new rules and the final rule, not all FFLs will incur record-keeping costs as a result of this rule's implementation. However, ATF agrees that there may be some FFLs that do maintain records indefinitely or that transfer their records to a successor FFL. That's not a thing. Those FFLs may now incur additional record-keeping costs to comply with this rule. Costs were estimated for those FFLs in ATF's revised final analysis. The final analysis. Because FFLs are required by code to send all their records to the ATF upon absolute discontinuance of their business or license activity, ATF does not consider costs for FFLs to ship their records to ATF upon such a discontinuance to be cost of this rule. Instead, it is a cost of the existing requirement in the code. ATF did not receive comments that would otherwise contradict the record-keeping analysis. Therefore, the new rules cost analysis remains the same. Most FFLs have and will continue to retain records, and this rule will not affect those FFLs. As stated above, most FFLs retain records for more than 20 years. This existing activity predates the final rule, and costs of this activity thus are not attributable to the rule. However, the small number of FFLs that currently destroy records older than 20 years could incur some costs. For purposes of the final inventory analysis, ATF estimates that in an effort to reduce their costs, these FFLs may utilize electronic storage. Oh, nice. Furthermore, most FFLs that use electronic formats of records or electronic form 4473 outsource these software applications to a third party rather than hiring staff and building in programmings in-house. Therefore, ATF is not incorporating the cost of an FFL to create and maintain electronic storage of their records. I've been against systems for gun shops like that forever because of this. The same way that we should be using all of this as precedent that the NFA doesn't need to exist. All of this is precedent that serial numbers don't need to exist, requiring them to justify the existence of serial numbers instead of complaining about they're pushing more serial numbers, infringing more serial numbers on us. This is the same thing. When we started making 4473s electronic and the records electronic and gun shops leaned into being more compliant more easily, we created precedents that the ATF is now using to pressure gun shops to digitalize all their records or keep all their records digitally. Next, I'm not commenting though. ATF uses subject matter experts as the best available information when it lacks data because there's no requirement to regulate or track certain activities or items. However, ATF was unable to use trace data and out-of-business records as a proxy to estimate the number of FFLs that do not retain records older than 20 years and that therefore could not have been affected by this rule. For this final rule, ATF determined this to be the best available information. Also, in its final analysis, ATF revised the cost for FFLs that currently voluntarily ship their records older than 20 years. Upon proclamation of this rule, the FFLs will no longer be able to ship their records to ATF that are older than 20 years without discontinuing business or licensed activity. However, shipping out of business records remains an option should those FFLs choose to continue their current licensed business activity or apply for a new license for a business that maintains an electronic record-keeping system so that they may dispose of their paper records to the ATF. What assholes. What assholes. Next is benefits. Some commenters stated that ATF did not quantify or monetize businesses for the record retention requirement. One commenter suggested that benefits that do not outweigh the costs. One commenter suggested that ATF did not demonstrate how many crimes would be solved through tracing firearms over 20 years old. Some commenters believed that records over 20 years, ATF would be unable to identify the most recent owner of the firearm because too much time would have passed, and this would lead to increased failures in tracing. One commenter believed ATF failed to meet the requirements of the APA because it did not explain how electronic records would lower the costs of storing records, nor did ATF explain why it did not need this information. So now they're being challenged on this whole idea of electronic record retention by the ATF. And here's the stupid ATF's response to that criminal activity. Tracing a firearm that was involved in criminal activity is an existing requirement and not a new requirement attributable to this rule precedents. Based on the amount of records previously received by the NTC National Tracing Center, ATF anticipates the cost burden for this requirement will be small. Commenters are incorrect in their assumption that the rule would lead to an increased rate of failed traces because the records are too old. To the contrary, being able to trace a firearm to the first unlicensed transferee of the firearm from a firearms licensee, no matter how long ago, provides useful investigative leads to law enforcement. So no matter how many people they're going to bother for a gun they purchased, no matter how long ago, and having persecuting individuals for a purchase they made years ago, up to over 20 years ago, that's useful for investigative leads to law enforcement. Challenge that. That's bullshit. Furthermore, this final rule now, that's persecution. That's persecution of people based on the property that they owned. That's abuse of the regulatory and enforcement division of the legislative, the executive branch. Furthermore, this final rule now includes section whatever of this preamble information on the number of traces submitted over the past 12 years that could not be successfully completed because the licensee ATF did not have the record for that firearm because the record was 20 years old and had been destroyed. ATF disagrees to the respect of putting forth additional analysis regarding electronic storage. The option for electronic storage is an existing option, and in this rule only expressly codifies and expands that option for licensees in an alternative method provided by the director or approved by the director. Specifically, it is anticipated that upon the option for maintaining electronic storage of Form 4473 will be updated via the ATF ruling issued contemporaneously with this final rule. Next is form updates. Commenters asserted that the cost to update software for electronic record keeping was underestimated. Some commenters feared it would cost a significant amount of money to update the existing software to track multiple serial numbers because current systems allow only for a single serial number. Other commenters stated that some FFLs would need to acquire new software systems because the existing systems may no longer be supported by the original developer to make updates. Some commenters suggested that ATF did not account for extra time needed to enter multiple serial numbers into records. And then the stupid ATF said this. The ATF concurs that based on public comments, it would likely cost a significant amount of money to revamp software programs to account for multiple serial numbers. For this and other reasons, ATF has revised the definition of frame or receiver so that it describes a single part of a weapon as the frame or receiver, meaning that only generally one serial number would be needed pre-recorded for a firearm in the same manner under current regulations. The rare exceptions would be if a manufacturer or importer chooses not to adopt an existing serial number on a firearm that is remanufactured or imported, or a multi-piece frame or receiver had been assembled from modular subparts with different serial numbers marked on the same frame or receiver. Obviously. Therefore, no cost was attributed to this requirement. There you go. Government costs. Many commenters stated that government would incur additional costs associated with the lawsuits filed against this rule. Some commenters worried that states will lose sales and tax revenue because companies will go out of business. Other commenters expressed concern that the government would spend more money arresting and incarcerating law-abiding people who believed would be criminals under this rule. One commenter stated that the rule would lead to increased cost of the government because the government will need additional personnel to enforce this rule. And here's the bloated, overpaid ATF's response to this. The people that created this whole situation are now getting paid overtime, more than likely, to deal with the situation they created. The department did not account for the cost of lawsuits because costs due to potential lawsuits would be speculative. Although ATF estimated there would be a number of businesses that go out of business, that's their problem. I mean, there is no guarantee of accuracy in the number of businesses that would go out of business due to implementation of this rule. Therefore, ATF deemed it too speculative to estimate a loss in tax revenue. Furthermore, ATF is not spending more money to arrest people who make and possess kit guns as a result of this rule. As stated earlier, nothing in this rule prevents unlicensed, law-abiding citizens and hobbyists from making their own firearms, commercially produced parts, or by using 3D printers, from transferring personally made guns to others as long as they are not engaged in the business or activity requiring a license. If such persons wish to engage in the business of manufacturing, importing, or dealing in firearms, they must obtain a license like other manufacturer, importer, or dealer. Or if you live in a state with universal background checks, we're not going to talk about that either. Lack of benefits. How'd you like that response? So, hey, government, you're going to get sued. Are you going to think about how much it's going to cost the other chunks of government when y'all get sued for this heinous atrocity of infringement? And they're like, nope. All right, so next is lack of benefits. Many commenters claimed that the assertion that kit guns are used in crimes is not supported by the something like jury All right, so here we go. Now, it was bad internet, I guess. I don't think it was the garbage trucks. It's also internet censorship, and I can't afford good internet. All right, so here we go. Lack of benefits, comments received. Many commenters claimed that the assertion that personally made kits are used in crimes is not supported. I'm making sure I'm good to go. Give me a 5x5. Was not supported by the Bureau of Something's Justice Survey on how many criminals acquire firearms. Referenced in this preamble, the rules asserted benefits are not supported by the FBI's Universal Crime Statistics. Many commenters stated that firearms are used in a small percentage of crimes. They commented that the number of firearms recovered at crime scenes is low and not all perpetrators are arrested and convicted. Is it working? Am I back? If I say stuff, it makes this thing wiggle, or no? Is it saying anything? It's making my thing wiggle. It's not out there listening. All right, so this is page 275, continued, stating that the inventory analysis failed to show why the lack of serial numbers is important to criminals. Okay, thanks, Patriot. And did not consider other methods that the criminal may use, removing a serial number or using a different type of weapon to circumvent the new requirements. Another commenter asserted that there's no evidence that personally made guns are the weapon of choice for criminals. Many commenters argued that ATF did not show how the proposed rule would reduce crime. Some commenters stated that the new rules did not indicate the number of traces that identified the perpetrator, resulted in arrest, or substantially affected the prosecution of the criminal, nor did it provide the percentage of unserialized firearms used in crimes or show how many crimes could be solved if personally made firearms could be traced. A commenter asserted that if the data is available, the public should be able to comment on it. Another commenter pointed out to studies that suggested that the firearms restrictions did not have an impact on gun violence. One commenter argued that the tracing of serialized firearms has failed to reduce deaths caused by these weapons. Another commenter stated that the majority of firearms traces are for weapons offenses, not violent crimes such as homicides, assaults, or robberies. Mere weapon offenses, according to the commenter, cause no immediate harm, and thus the vast majority of traces do not involve the remediation of many violent uses of guns. The commenter also argued that the costs of failing to obtain a conviction on a weapons offense are minuscule, especially because the perpetrator will be likely convicted of some other associated crime. This commenter also stated that the ATF failed to show how an increase in traces would lead to increased arrests and convictions, and that ATF did not provide a monetary benefit to this supposed increase. I think that's what that says. Because only a small number of firearms required to be marked under this rule would ever be traced. According to the commenter, the external costs of failed tracing are low and do not support the burden of rulemaking. Another commenter argued that homicides committed with kits would be a very small portion of cases that would be addressed by this rule, while another commenter claimed it would take 30 years of homicides committed with kits to equal 1 year of homicides committed with serialized firearms. One commenter stated that although ATF reported the number of traces that include personally made firearms and the number of homicides related to the uses of personally made firearms, ATF did not attempt to monetize, is that the right word? These deaths and injuries. Is that the right damn word? Another commenter stated that ATF failed to show the value or benefits, either individually or on the whole, of regulating firearms kits with a partially complete frame or receiver, or unassembled frames or receivers and related parts kits. One commenter stated that ATF failed to explain why it cannot, is this right, monetize or quantify the purposed benefit of consistent marking requirements. The commenter stated that the agency failed to explain who benefits and how large the benefits are, thus not meeting the burden under the APA. I don't remember what the APA is. The commenter argued that the ATF could have provided the benefit of easing marking requirements without adding additional marking requirements. One commenter stated that there's no need for regulation of personally made kits owners or regulation because the kit owners can voluntarily mark their firearms. If they choose to, the commenter said it is because they do not find benefit in it. Okay, if they choose not to, the commenter said it is because they do not find a benefit in it, and it only hurts themselves if the firearm is lost or stolen. The commenter also stated that the ATF failed to provide information on the number of lost or stolen kits or parts kits and the number of these firearms or kits that could not be returned to the legal owner due to the lack of serial number. Come on. Additionally, the commenter said ATF failed to show how often criminals receive personally made firearms using a straw purchaser. Another commenter argued that the rule would not deter straw purchasers. They have like 400 something comments, and they filtered it down to many tens of thousands of comments, and they just shoved on page 277 all of those comments together. Don't get mad at the process. That's always going to be there. Don't get mad at the grass. Figure out an efficient way to cut the grass. And this isn't grass. I'm using that as an analogy. When you cut this grass effectively, it doesn't come back, right? You can cut the grass. You can, I don't want to say the other thing, you can prevent the grass from growing. And that's what we need to do, is not just cut the grass, it's prevent it from growing. This is a hell of a lot to put together in one section. And let's see how the unscrupulous, heinous ATF responds to this. The uniform crime statistics referenced by commenters are compiled through the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting, another one we have to learn, UCR. The Uniform Crime Reporting Program, however, does not collect crime information on personally made guns. The Uniform Crime Reporting, if you're not familiar with that, is a giant portion of why this is happening today. This didn't happen 10 years ago, and they're too scared to not let it happen before we get new universal crime report or uniform crime reporting. It's a whole nother topic. It's super critical, very critical, very critical. Big portion of this. So I'm going to start again. The uniform crime statistics referenced by the commenters are compiled through the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program. The UCR, however, does not collect crime personally made firearms. As a result, so they're blaming 1934 crime reporting tech that they created and are part of, and that's part of their job that they're not paying attention to, and they fiddle around with guns. So they're blaming a part of their own obligation that they've neglected as to why they need to infringe on this portion of our property. But I'm not commenting here. The UCR program, however, does not collect crime information on personally made firearms. As a result, the ATF did not rely on Universal Crime Reporting Program data to explain the rise in suspected personally made firearms that are recovered and traced from crime scenes. FBI Universal Crime Statistics were not considered pertinent for the present purposes and were not utilized in analyzing the costs and benefits of this rule. So we don't like your numbers because we didn't use your numbers. Furthermore, based on tracing and National Integrated Ballistics Information Network data, many law enforcement agencies may not be reporting personally made firearms accurately, and therefore ATF believes that the number of personally made firearms reported as being used in crimes is significantly smaller than the actual number. What? ATF believes that the number of personally made firearms reported as being used in crimes is significantly smaller than the actual number. ATF says that the number of these things being used in crimes is significantly smaller. Aware of these potential reporting errors, the number of personally made firearms ATF presented in the inventory analysis accompanying the rule changes and this final rule is likely to be much lower than the actual number recovered. So your concern is that not enough of these guns are impacted, that this is a non-issue, and they're saying, yes, that's the correct. ATF did, however, provide more quantifiable benefits in the final inventory analysis based on an increased ability to trace all firearms, and particularly personally made firearms. ATF reiterates that the primary benefit of the final rule is proclamating public safety and restricting felons and other prohibited persons from access to firearms. So did you realize what they just did there? They took all of these valid concerns, much like some of the other really important concerns that they've blown off in the rest of this document on page 276 and 277. They answered it in 2 paragraphs. One paragraph said, we don't agree with your numbers because we didn't use your numbers, so we're ignoring your numbers. And the other one said that these guns are barely used in crime, and the reason that we're doing this is because we reiterate the primary benefit of this final new rule is promoting public safety and restricting felons and other prohibited persons access to firearms. So when they're challenged on the effectiveness of all of this infringement, their statement right here is the whole statement. We reiterate that our primary benefit is the primary benefit of this rule is promoting public safety. That's their answer. That's it all. That's the extract of it right there. Take it. It's the end of page 278. It's the second to last paragraph on page 278. That's the extract of this whole thing. I'll keep going. Proposed alternatives. Thousands of commenters claimed that the ATF did not mention any of the regulatory alternatives proposed by the wider firearms industry, and several commenters believes were raised with ATF during an early 2021 meeting reported by the Wall Street Journal. Comment on all that. Other commenters asserted that ATF failed to adequately consider or explain why it was not considering the regulatory alternatives provided by the rule changes. For example, one industry member stated, of its 4 regulatory alternatives, ATF did not explain regulatory alternative number 1, which was no change, and regulatory alternative number 3, which was to grandfather all existing firearms. For instance, the commenter stated that ATF did not explain for alternative number 3 why it would be difficult to bring enforcement actions against the continued manufacturing of non-compliant receivers, or explain why the burden of doing so would not be justified by the alleged fact that there are no costs associated with the third option's implementation. Numerous commenters, I better put this, I can't do it now. Numerous commenters opposed to the new rule stated that ATF should grandfather in all, am I still here? Everybody, looks like everybody left, I guess 2 hours, ditched out. Yeah, right at the 2 hour, like all my numbers dropped. So I don't know if everybody just left or if I'm still connected. I'll just keep going, I guess. Numerous commenters opposed to the new rule stated the ATF should grandfather in all personally owned items to preserve citizens' civil liberties and to avoid criminal entrapment. Some commenters suggested that ATF allow non-FFLs to continue selling unfinished lower receivers while placing the burden on the consumer to register the firearm with the FFL once the consumer completes the process of privately manufacturing a lower receiver. The commenter argued that it is illogical to require manufacturers and retailers of unfinished lower receivers to adhere to a regulatory system that is veiled scheme of forced compliance against gun owners, in the commenter's opinion. Only when an unfinished lower receiver is finished by the end user can the final owner be identified and the markings be completed and known, such as gauge or caliber. One commenter suggested that ATF consider non-regulatory alternatives such as corrective taxes and subsidies, aid from non-governmental organizations, tort law, public service advocacy, and private contracting. Another commenter suggested that the ATF consider alternatives such as requiring that records be retained for longer than 20 years, but that indefinitely or allowing anyone to mark weapons. All right, let's just delete some kind of doofus over here. So if you want to see what a government narc looks like when they come in and attempt to distract and create problems. So if you want to see what there you go. So you can report them as hate speech, and then lock the channel, and then they'll come back with their second account and do their best to disrupt the message. So there you go. Go ahead and comment if you're out there and you're actual not a government agent, then go ahead and comment in there and help me get rid of all those comments on the screen that were placed by some kind of fucking government agent who's scared to let you see what a balsa wood garbage thing this is. If anybody is concerned about this, I'd be skeptical. If anybody's complying with this, I'd be upset, because this is balsa wood. All right, I don't know if I'm connected anymore. All we're getting is weird spam. So if there's nobody else out there, I'll just move this off the screen, I guess. Let's see. The department disagrees with commenters who stated the ATF did not consider regulatory alternatives proposed by the wider firearms industry during the 2021 meeting with the Wall Street Journal, because the ATF was not presented with any regulatory alternatives other than keeping the current limited and outdated definitions. Yeah, if you would then, Patriot, throw a couple of comments in there to help scroll up a bunch of federal agent bullshit that was put in there by government actors attempting to disrupt the information. No change alternate has no costs or benefits because it would involve maintaining the status quo. This alternative was considered but not implemented because the Gun Control Act requires that all firearms be regulated. Currently, the vast majority of firearms fall outside the scope of the existing regulatory definition of frame or receiver. Due to current court rulings, it would be difficult for the department to continue to successfully prosecute criminal activity relying on the existing regulatory definition of frame or receiver, because that definition does not capture the vast majority of firearms designs. So does that mean people are leaving, they're going to be put free from jail because they used an incorrect definition? Curious. With respect to grandfathering all existing firearms, the proposed rule allow manufacturers and importers to mark firearms in the same design and configuration as the same manner as before the effective date on the final rule. The final rule makes clear that almost all firearms ATF previously classifies as falling within the definition of frame or receiver prior to the issuance of the final rule are grandfathered and may continue to be marked in the same manner as before with the effective date of the final rule. The only exceptions are certain ATF classifications of partially complete, disassembled, or non-functional frames or receivers, because at the time of classifications of those articles, ATF may not have been provided with or did not examine a full and complete parts kit containing those items, along with any associated templates, jigs, molds, equipments, tools, instructions, guides, or marketing materials that were made available by the seller or distributor of the item or kit to the purchaser of the recipient of the kit. As explained in the final rule, these items and materials are necessary for the ATF and others to make a proper firearm classification under stupid Gun Control Act and the stupid NFA. They're actually written in there this time. If there's anybody who's actual human watching this, thanks Mark for that thing. Please type a bunch of shit, because I can't even bring the stuff over here because of some freaking narc dropped a bunch of garbage trying to incite people to their bullshit distraction. To clarify, existing firearms parts kits with a partially complete frame or receiver and personally made firearm owned by or serviced by FFLs that were determined not to be frames or receivers as defined prior to this rule will not be grandfathered in, meaning that FFLs may be required to mark these frames in accordance with the new regulations if the FFLs wish to maintain them in their inventories. This rule does not require unlicensed personally made firearms owners to do anything with their firearms maintained solely for personal use yet. ATF has determined that the non-regulatory alternative of imposing a higher tax on firearms that are currently being regulated would only make the cost of regulated firearms more expensive to the public and would not affect the personally made firearms or firearms parts kits that currently fall outside the regulatory scheme. Subjecting firearms to higher taxes would not ensure that all firearms, whether commercially or privately made, are treated the same under the regulations when they enter interstate commerce. This would in turn not achieve ATF's goal of ensuring that felons and prohibitive persons are not able to obtain or firearms, and that firearms can be traced. Now, why don't we have the Bureau of Keeping Drugs Away from Drug Addicts? Because that's basically what they're suggesting their entire role is: the alcohol, tobacco, explosives, and firearms, of which 500,000 die from tobacco, 200,000 die from alcohol, and 11,000 die from guns. This is their only goal in life? This is ridiculous. So challenge that shit. And they're obviously paying somebody to come in here and type a bunch of BS garbage to distract and obfuscate from the actual conversation. So thanks to Mark, you're $60. Well, you and Garrett dropped $60 yesterday. So that and the $40 is how much money I made this week. We haven't had a sale at the store, so I do appreciate it. I'm not trying to get rich here, but I am trying to exist. So much appreciated for the super chat. A bunch of people are going to listen to this and hopefully use it. And you made that possible, Mark. Thank you. This in turn, let's see, would not achieve the ATF's objectives of ensuring, whatever, fucking objectives. The objective of this rule is not to make firearms more expensive or more difficult for the public to obtain. It's just a side effect. Rather, the objectives of the rule are to ensure that all firearms, as defined by the Gun Control Act, are regulated similarly. To remove the current regulatory definitions of frame or receiver and replace them with the definitions that capture a vast majority of firearms designs and advancements in firearms technology, to allow law enforcement to trace firearms, including personally made firearms, and to prevent felons and other prohibited persons from easily acquiring firearms. It is not clear how implementing corrective taxes would prevent criminals from obtaining firearms or help law enforcement officers solve crimes. It is not clear how implementing corrective taxes would prevent criminals from obtaining firearms. Did they just say that they don't even know how their own bullshit would prevent criminals from obtaining firearms or help law enforcement? It is not clear how the commenter suggested alternative scenarios using non-regulatory alternatives would be carried out, like tort or public advocacy. However, the alternatives are out of the ATF's purview and beyond the scope of this regulation. Therefore, the alternatives were not considered. So they're going to suggest that although they only know how to use a hammer, and there's a better solution here using a tape measure, they only know how to use a hammer. Therefore, any suggestion that there's a better way to do it without destroying with a hammer is outside their purview and then therefore not considered. So we have options here because this is a government entity to put that restraint on them. Okay, so I'm going to quit commenting. Although the alternative of requiring record retention, let me put this in my comments though. Why is it so hard to copy and paste off of their stupid PDF? Oh, is that what it is? Maybe it's because I have the thing open from ATF that's how their agents know where to go look at it. They suck down onto my computer and then slither over onto my YouTube and then start putting their weird garbage in the chat. All right, although the alternative of requiring record retention for longer than 20 years but less than indefinitely was considered, ATF determined this alternative was not the best course of action because firearms are durable items that can be in circulation for many decades or even beyond 100 years. An alternative, think of how bad New York Outcast is going to feel when he's got like a kind of like robot guts and some kind of bionic eyes or whatever, and it's like 300 years into the future, and then there's 100-year-old Glocks laying around. He's going to freak out. Anyway, so an alternative specifying a specific time frame for record retention requirements would not align with the shelf life of most firearms. Thus, without the infinite retention requirement imposed by this rule, ATF would continue to encounter the problem of not being able to successfully trace older firearms that are used in the commission of a crime. As a result, ATF does not believe such alternatives would achieve the intended benefits of this final rule. Oh, nice. The benefits of the final rule. That should be a t-shirt. Everybody should be forced to tattoo the benefits of the final rule somewhere on them as serial number with their FFL's first 4 digits and last 4 digits with a dash sign. And then that, okay, so we'll keep going. Final regulatory flexible analysis. Many commenters asserted that the rule will have a significant impact on small businesses. Other commenters argued that a robust small business analysis was not performed. Some commenters stated that the rule would have a negative impact on many small businesses, including those owned by veterans and families. They further stated the rule would impact businesses that sell firearms parts as well as those that specialize in firearms customization. A major distributor of firearms parts pointed out that ATF failed to explain how there can be a significant financial impact on individual businesses, but not all the businesses in the same industry. One commenter listed multiple reasons the initial Regulatory Flexibility Act, come on, now we have another thing to worry about, was in the commenter's opinion not done according to law. The reasons included a lack of statement of objectives and legal basis for the proposed rule, a lack of evidence that the 132,000 something affected entities would experience minimal or no cost, a failure to accurately estimate the affected population of non-FFL retailers, a lack of sufficient analysis on the impact of non-FFL retailers, and a failure to provide significant analysis of the impact on the unfinished lower receiver market. The commenter stated there was no analysis addressing the cost of becoming a licensed or providing options that would have the same result as a regulation. Additionally, the commenter stated that whatever the IFRA is, analysis contained errors such as the ATF's failure to monetize or quantify benefits or explain why it did not do so, and the ATF dismissal or underestimation of costs. One commenter asserted that the rule has net negative benefits, so it should not move forward. The commenter believed that the change in record retention requirements would result in fewer successful firearms traces because of the increased number of documents retained. Several commenters stated that the ATF failed to provide the actual number of small businesses that would be affected and the estimated costs that affected entities would occur. The commenters stated that manufacturers of unfinished receivers and firearms parts kits with an unfinished frame or receiver would choose not to obtain an FFL and instead go out of business. This would hurt firearms manufacturers because they purchase these items as part of their production process. Several commenters suggested that this rule would result in significant job losses in manufacturing. One commenter stated that this rule would affect his ability to expand his business, and another commenter stated it had put off business expansion and hiring new hiring because of the rule. Another commenter stated that because of the anticipated increase in the price of unfinished receivers as a result of the rule, he would no longer be able to provide classes in firearm safety, maintenance, and marksmanship. One commenter stated that the real cost of the proposed rule is not the lost revenue of the affected companies, but the loss in the value of these companies, which hurts the company's owners. The commenter also stated that the ATF failed to show the anticipated number of jobs lost and the value associated with these jobs, or associated with the loss. Many commenters, did I just lose internet again? Mosquitoes are back. Many commenters asserted that the ATF underestimated the cost to the industry. One commenter stated, am I still connected? Many commenters asserted the ATF underestimated the cost to the industry. One commenter stated that small business would need to acquire engraving equipment and inventory tracking system. Those businesses that could not afford this expense, according to the commenter, would be forced to destroy inventory. One commenter stated that both large and small entities would need to spend time and money to ensure compliance with the new regulations. One commenter argued that ATF did not consider the true cost to non-manufacturing FFLs for equipment purchases and training, and for the volume of personally made firearms needing serialization to recoup the return on investment, as if any of this wasn't an intended consequence of this infringement. all of this has somebody giggling on the other side. This is exactly what they wanted to do: tie up, confuse, and put out of business. So they just took 400 and something thousand comments, and they decided to shove all of those together, and let's see which Tetris block responses the lazy, heinous ATF is going to respond with here. The ATF agrees that different entities will experience a range of costs as outlined by different chapters of the inventory analysis, and ATF revised the regulatory flexibility analysis to describe the largest impact on small businesses, which is that some businesses will no longer continue operations. Holy shit, did you just hear that? So they revised the regulatory flexibility analysis to describe the largest impact on small businesses, which is that some of them will no longer continue to exist. And now their numbers have been updated to reflect that cost. What a heinous bunch of heinous murders. Anyway, ATF concurs that large and small entities may require time to research and understand regulations. However, this is already an existing cost of regulations in this industry, and the government in general is not a new requirement specific to this rule. Therefore, it is not considered a cost to this rule. In accordance with the Small Business Regulatory Enforcement, the SBRFRA, a small business compliance guide will be published because this rule will impact a number of small businesses. So F you and who cares? We're going to make a book you can read. Wow. So that was page 284, 283 of complaints about how it's going to put people out of business, constrain them, and change the industry and devalue, right? And then their response is in 2 paragraphs. Yep. And so what? We're going to write a book for you. You can write a book about what it's like to die as a small business. It's called a SBRFRA. What a bunch of D-holes. All right. So next is called APA requirements. We're on page 285. This is amazing. This is better than any romance novel because we're the ones getting yanked around here. Comments received. One commenter suggested that this rule should be considered both a regulatory and economically significant rule because of its impact on a substantial number of small businesses indicated in the inventory analysis. That is probably not the inventory analysis. So whatever it says RAA, I say inventory analysis, but I have no idea what that actually is because I'm numb to this whole stupid letter things all the time. Another commenter believed that the rule violated Executive Order 12866. You don't want to violate executive orders. Those are written by the presidents. So they're super special rules. Here's, oh, isn't that nice? So basically the APA requirements. One commenter suggested that this rule should be considered both a regulatory and economically significant rule because of its impact on a substantial number of small businesses, as indicated by their own analysis. Another commenter believed the rule violated some executive order, which I was making fun of. So then this is the stupid, heinous, infringing ATF's response to that concern. As stated in the new rules, this rule is a significant regulatory action under whatever. However, this rule is not economically significant. Oh, okay. As the term is defined in another executive order, an economically significant rule is estimated to cost $100 million or more in one given year. This rule is not expected to reach that threshold, and as discussed in some other analysis, the ATF agrees that this rule could not potentially affect small businesses that only manufacture or deal in firearms kits with a partially complete frame or receiver, but notes that whether a rule has significant impacts on small businesses does not determine if the rule is economically significant under another executive order. Nonetheless, because this rule has potential to significantly affect small businesses, they have performed an IFRA and a FRIFRA. So you're welcome. ATF has performed, everybody can calm down. ATF has performed both an IFRA and a FRIFRA. So you calm now. So it's all good. I guess it took to page 286, but now we can be okay with that. So that's, somebody got paid overtime to write this so that we have to deal with it. And that's a result of it right there. Congressional Review Act. One commenter disagreed with the department's claim that the new rules, that this rulemaking is not the major rule, which is defined by some other code and a part of a rule that has resulted in, it's likely to result in an annual effect on the economy of $100 million or more, significant adverse effects on innovation. So somebody was like, this is going to cost a lot and it's going to mess with innovation, which I guess violates some other thing. The ATF, who is heinous and infringing, says ATF disagrees that this is a major rule as defined by this one thing. The rule is estimated to cost less than $100 million in any given year, as outlined in the standalone analysis. Further, the department disagrees that this rule stifles or impacts innovation. To the contrary, the regulations are being updated to accommodate changes in firearms technology and terminology, and the industry may develop and innovate to comply with the new updated regulations. What a nice opportunity to comply with new regulations. Thanks, ATF. I had nothing else to do this week either. And next is an unfunded mandate. Those are fun. One commenter believed that the rule would extend the one-year allowable threshold of $177 million adjusted for inflation since 1995, set by the Unfunded Mandates Reform Act. One commenter believed that the rule would exceed the one-year allowable threshold. So I guess they're not allowed to dink with the world more than $177 million a year, maybe? I don't know what that read. Some lawyer would have to tell us what this is. If this start getting lame, I'm going to quit reading them because this is getting to turn into like just dumb words, right? Like, I don't know what any of this means. ATF disagrees that the rule will be a major rule under the Unfunded Mandates Reform Act. This rule is estimated to cost less than $100 million in every given year and outlined in a standalone analysis. Other concerns are the comment process. I'm drinking again. Page 287. We haven't even gotten to page 300 yet. I don't know what's worse, coughing or waiting half an hour to find the mute button to cough. I feel like I should take a break, but I guess I'll wait a little while. All right, so next, comment process. One commenter, at least one commenter claimed, out of the 400 and something comments, at least one commenter claimed that there were concerns in online groups and boards that a number of comments meeting the guidelines for being publicly posted were subsequently deleted people to issue new comments for the rule, or that comments were moderated prior to publishing, raising a free speech concern. The commenter stated, although these comments may have contained offensive language or included threats or may have been similar to other comments indicating spam, these comments still should still have been considered as either supporting or opposing the proposed rule. Another commenter stated that the agency's instructions that commenters self-identify and provide contact information severely limit the degree and amount of public participation, that they also argued that these instructions chilled speech protected by the First Amendment and discouraged members of the public from commenting. Because of this, the commenter stated the ATF should reopen the comment period. The ATF deleted their comment. No, the ATF just received just over 290,000 comments during the 90-day comment period. The vast majority of these comments were received through the online federal portal at regulations.gov, with the balance coming through the mail and fax from one dude, barbecue. The comment period's public participation section informed the public that there may be a significant delay between the time a person submits a comment through one of the three methods before it becomes visible online due to the volume of comments received in any given day. The Federal Docket Management System, the portal through which the federal agencies manage their rulemaking docklets, requires the agency to review comments before making them visible to the public on the website, regulations.gov, with the exception of a limited ability to redact. The thing does not allow agency users of the system to alter or change the substance of a comment. ATF posted and reviewed comments, even numerous duplicate comments from the same submitter with the same content, that were generally consistent with the posting guidelines, comments that did not contain excessive profanity or contain inappropriate or sensitive content. No comments were deleted or removed unless requested by a submitter. The department disagrees that ATF instructions that commenter self-identify severely limits and degree of amount of public participation, chill speech, or discourage the public from commenting, as evidenced by the volume of comments received on the thing, as well as the content of some comments that expressly declared they will not comply with any regulation. ATF has historically requested persons to self-identify and include contact information, largely in the event that a person makes a comment that the agency would like to follow up on, to gain further information or perspective from the commenter. There were recent updates to the online federal portal that allowed the public to submit comments under an anonymous feature. ATF accepted, posted, and considered these comments. Accordingly, the department disagrees that the ATF should reopen the comment period. No federalism impact statement. At least one commenter asserted that the ATF should have, are they literally going to waste pages of this document for reacting to these single comments that are not necessarily, I don't know, are these critical? At least one commenter asserted that ATF should have prepared a federalism summary for the comment period pursuant to the executive order entitled Federalism. This executive order is a directive meant to guarantee the division of governmental responsibilities between the national government and the states, and further the policies of the Unfunded Mandates Reform Act. Under Section 6 of the executive order, agencies are not permitted, to the extent practicable and permitted by law, to issue any regulation that has federalism implications. If the regulation imposes substantial direct compliance costs on a state and local governments and is not required by statute, or if the regulation preempts state laws unless the agency consults with federal or with state and local officials and prepares a federalism impact study. The commenter argued new ruling acknowledged that the states have chosen different policy-making paths to regulate or not regulate personally made kits. The department and ATF failed to engage in federalism analysis of its constitutional and statutory authority for its actions. In accordance with section whatever of the executive order, that section requires such analysis and consultation with state or local officials if the agency's actions limits policy-making discretion of the states, and if there are significant uncertainties as to whether the national action is authorized or appropriate. The commenter further argued that pursuant to whatever the executive order, the new ruling failed to acknowledge that the federal redefinition of firearm and mandated marking requirements would preempt state laws, such as state laws on the storage and transportation of firearms and on the marking or registration of personally made guns. Finally, the commenter observes that state law often rely on federal classifications. For all these reasons, according to the commenter, states might directly be affected by this new rule. Well, I'll shut up because that's a super good one. And I'm glad if just one person said that they addressed it now. So there, me. All right, next is their response, even though they're still infringing and heinous. The department disagrees that the federalism impact statement is needed for this rulemaking. Oh, what do you know? They're above the law. This rule, which implements the Gun Control Act, does not preempt state law or impose a substantive compliance cost on states. Under the blah, 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 state and local jurisdictions may enact their own requirements and restrictions on firearms unless there is a direct and positive conflict with such that the two cannot be reconciled or consistently stand together. State and local jurisdictions are therefore free to create their own definitions of terms such as firearm and frame a receiver to be applied for purposes of state or local law within the respective jurisdictions. They are free to mandate their own requirements concerning the marking, storage, sale, and transportation of firearms. This rule points out that numerous state and local jurisdictions have, in fact, enacted their own restrictions on unmarked, unserialized, 3D printed, or untraceable firearms and firearms with obliterated, removed, or altered serial numbers, and have adopted requirements to record the serial numbers marked on pawned firearms. This rule, as proposed and finalized, does not purport to impose any costs upon or otherwise limit the authority of state or local governments. To the contrary, Gun Control Act and the NFA implementing regulations, blah, 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 which are not being amended, expressly state that the holders of federal firearms licenses and NFA taxpayers are not conferred any right or privilege to conduct business or activity contrary to state or other law, that they are not immune from punishment for conducting a firearm or ammunition business or activity in violation of state or other law. And then it says, oh shit, final rule. So I think we just got to the actual thing. I think all of that was preamble. So that makes me want to go pee. I'm going to go pee. We're at the bottom of page 291. Y'all can take a break. No talking, but you can go back through your notes. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the comments here. No talking while I'm gone. Ag Riser's in charge. No, I'm going to put Patriot in charge. So Patriot's in charge while I'm gone. No talking. You can look at your notes. You can ask questions in the comments, and I'll be back. There's one hall pass. You can use it one at a time. 2 hours and 30 minutes. What do we start at? 232 or something? 291. So we're not even at 300. 70 something pages to go. But I think we're at final rule. Oh man, I'm going to just open this again because I don't want to scroll down. Well, I guess I can scroll down. Page 291, 291, 291. So we went through the notice, the analysis. We just got done with the issues raised in support. Most of it was issues raised in support and issues raised in opposition. This is most of what we've read, is these two little things right here. That's 99% of what we read. This was not that long. They didn't put any page numbers in here because they're heinous. And this was like, not that long. And then this was horrible. But it was, interesting to hear them acknowledge lots of interesting, important aspects and then completely ignore them. Completely disregard them. And now we're getting to final rule, which is going to just be the horrible, rancid, heinous definitions of all this garbage, and then a whole bunch of crap I'm probably not going to read because I'm guessing this is going to be all the blah, 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 blah. So we're going to get into final rule. Now, does anybody remember what pages I was on? Dang it. 292? Should have wrote it down. There we go, 291. All right, here we go. Final rule. First definition of a firearm. The rule finalizes with minor changes the amendments proposed in the proposed ruling to define the definition of firearm. This is hard to read. In Part 478, which clarified that this term includes a weapons parts kit that is designed to or may readily be completed, assembled, or restored, or otherwise converted to expel a projectile by the action of an explosive. So they've changed the definition of firearm to, which was a weapon designed to readily, no, it used to just be a weapon designed to expel a projectile by the action of an explosive, and it's now a weapon parts kit that is designed to or readily may be completed, assembled, restored, or otherwise converted to expel. So they've really horked the shit out of the definition of firearm. So there you go. Then definition of frame or receiver. The final rule accepts the recommendations of numerous commenters and provides a new definition to remove and replace the terms firearm frame or receiver and frame or receiver in about a zillion different things referenced. The new definition set forth in a new referenced code subsection, whatever, separately defines frame for handguns and receiver for rifles, shotguns, and other weapons that expel a projectile other than handguns. So they're trying to get firearms in there. So anything that we would be considered a firearm now, anything that's not defined by the NFA, they have now given a receiver. Handguns have a frame. Why would they need to differentiate handguns from the rest of things? Is that part of this intentionally, or was that a strategic move? I mean, was it accidental, or was that a strategic move to separate handguns by the definition of the core component that's serialized? It's a question for y'all. Rather than a definition that describes any housing for any fire control component, these definitions now describe only a single housing or structural component for one specific fire control component of a given weapon, including variants thereof, a term that is also defined. For handguns or variants thereof, it is the housing or structure of the primary energized component designed to hold back the hammer, striker, bolt, or similar component prior to initiation of the firing sequence. Example, the sear or equivalent, even if pins or other attachments are required to connect such component to the housing or structure. For rifles, shotguns, and projectile weapons other than handguns or variants thereof, it is the housing or structure of the primary component designed to block or seal the breech prior to initiation of the firing sequence, such as the bolt, breech lock, or equivalent, even if pins or other attachments are required to connect such component to the housing or structure. The final rule amends the definitional supplement to frame or receiver entitled Frame, Muffler, or Silencer Frame or Receiver to define a single component of a complete firearms. What time is it? You know, I got to go do something. I'm going to go put us on hold again. I got to get something out in the mail. I thought I heard the mail lady, and I got to get my, what do you call that thing, extension out today. Stupid taxes. We get to pay for all of this stress and frustration and all the overtime some jerk got paid to create all this crap. And then some other jerk got paid to be the bureaucrat who was like, yeah, let's take this to another committee of jerks who got paid overtime to sit around and go, I don't like the way this annoys them. Let's make it infringe more. All right, where were we? The final rule amends the definitional supplement to frame or receiver entitled Firearms Muffler or Silencer Frame or Receiver to define a single component of a complete firearms muffler or silencer device as the frame or receiver, and clarifies how the definition applies to a modular device with more than one housing or structure for the primary internal sound reduction component. Specifically, the terms frame and receiver mean the housing or structure for the primary internal component designed to reduce the sound projectile, i.e. baffles, baffling material, expansion chamber, or equivalent. Formally essential internal components. Additionally, the terms frame and receiver now exclude a removable end cap of an outer tube or modular piece. The final rule does not adopt the definitional supplement of split or modular frame or receiver, though a definition was added to define the term multi-piece frame or receiver, and text was added to explain how and when such a frame or receiver must be marked. In this regard, the rebuttable presumption in the definition of frame or receiver was amended in the final rule to explain that the marked subparts of a multi-piece frame or receiver must be presumed to be part of the frame or receiver of a weapon or device absent an ATF classification or other reliable evidence to the contrary. That's abuse. This is tyranny right here. They took something that was bad, and instead of saying we shouldn't even be doing this, they turned it into a weapon. This is horrible. The final rule amends the supplement of the proposed definition of frame or receiver entitled partially complete, disassembled, or inoperable frame or receiver by replacing the term inoperable with the more accurate term non-functionable. Oh, good, yeah, because inoperable, what? But in non-functional? Oh, thank you. Now I understand. Clarifying that this supplement also addresses frame or receiver parts, kits. 3, explaining what it means for a frame or receiver to function as a frame or receiver. 4, removing the definition partially complete and instead expressly excluding from the definition of frame or receiver forgings, castings, printing, extrusion, unmachined bodies, or similar articles that have not yet reached a stage of manufacture where they are clearly identifiable as an unfinished component part of a weapon. For example, unformed blocks of metal, liquid polymers, and raw materials. How do you not shake your head at reading that? And then 5, clarifying the items that the director may consider when classifying a partially complete, disassembled, or non-functional frame or receiver. 6, providing detailed examples of what would and would not be a frame or receiver that may readily be completed, assembled, restored, or otherwise converted to a functional state. The final rule makes minor changes to the proposed supplement to the definition of frame or receiver, entitled Destroyed Frame or Receiver. For example, the final rule removes examples of specific ATF-approved methods of destruction in the regulatory text in favor of general terminology. Additionally, the final rule clarifies that the term frame or receiver includes the specific component of a complete weapon or a complete firearm, muffler, or silencer device, including variants thereof, determined, classified by the director to be defined as a firearm, frame, or receiver. Prior to publication of the final rule, except for determinations concluding that a partially complete, disassembled, or non-functional frame or receiver, including a weapon or frame receiver parts kits, was not or did not include a firearm, frame, or receiver as previously defined. I want to punch my refrigerator. This grandfathered provision also includes non-exclusive examples and diagrams of previously classified weapons. They go to school not just to learn how to make words useless, but also how to bother people and to know when and where to poke a mammal to make them react the way they expect them to react for the bigger plan. So don't get mad at this. Get mad at the fact that you got to mow grass, right? Get mad at the fact that you got to spend some time, off away from all this. But it's an obligation. It's a responsibility. Liberty requires eternal vigilance. This shit here is the eternal vigilance part. Thanks for rolling up your sleeves and being part of it. Oh, man. No, that's wrong, Rich, but it's definitely a razor cut in that direction, but that's an over-exaggeration. That's not correct in your comment there. All right, so the next is definition of readily. The final rule makes minor changes to the proposed definition of readily in parts 478 to make clear that it applies to any process, action, or physical state, and that the listed factors are only relevant to firearms classifications, definitions of complete weapon and complete muffler or silencer device. Oh, I forgot. I'm reading the actual definitions of the new rule. Dang. So this is the definitions of readily, and then the final rule makes minor changes to the proposed definition of readily, okay, and to make it clear that it applies to any process or action or physical state, and that the listed factors are only relevant to firearms classifications. And then, okay, I guess this is the next definition. The next definition is complete weapon and complete muffler or silencer device. I'm stretching my headset keeps falling off. So I don't know when the world changed to have to say muffler or silencer device, but that was the first slight, and this is another slight. This is tyranny. This is abuse right here. Definitions of complete weapon and complete muffler or silencer device. The final rule makes minor amendments to the proposed definitions of complete weapon and complete muffler or silencer device by deleting as designed as it modified the phrase necessary to function. This change was necessary to ensure that firearms are not designated or are not designed to avoid marking times limits by eliminating a non-essential component in the manufacturing process. I don't get that. So then the next one is definition of privately made firearm. The final rule makes minor changes to the proposed definition of privately made firearm to make it consistent with the changes to the definitions of frame or receiver and importer's manufacturer serial number, and for clarity regarding the exclusion for pre-1968 manufactured firearms. Ridiculous. Definition of importers or manufacturer serial number. The final rule modifies the proposed definition of importer or manufacturer serial number. The term means the serial number placed on a license by a licensee on a firearm, including any full or abbreviated license number, any such identification on a privately made firearm, or serial number issued by the director. It also specifies that for purposes of the code, the term shall include any associated licensee name or licensee city or state placed on a firearm. These changes ensure that these markings are considered part of the importer's or manufacturer's serial number because a firearm is difficult to trace without this information. Assumption that can easily be challenged, and this whole thing crumbles. This is balsa wood that is painted and mocked up to look like a big giant thing. This is balsa wood and tissue paper. There's like 6 or 8 things that tie it to the ground, and it's ridiculous. If anybody's scared of this, it's crazy. If anybody's complying with it, that's like complying with balsa wood and tissue paper. Definition of gunsmith. The rule finalizes with clarifying changes the proposed definition of engaged in the business as it applies to gunsmith. Most significantly, the final rule makes it clear that the licensed gun dealer gunsmiths are not required to be licensed as manufacturers if they only perform gunsmithing services on existing firearms for their customers or for another licensee's customers, because the work is not being performed to create firearms for sale or distribution. These services may include customizing a customer's complete weapon by changing its appearance through painting and camouflaging or engraving or applying a protective coating, or by replacing the original barrel stock or trigger mechanism. Licensed dealer gunsmiths may also purchase complete weapons, make repairs, and resell them without being licensed as manufacturers. Likewise, under the final rule, licensed dealer gunsmiths may make such repairs for other licensees who plan to resell them without being licensed as a manufacturer. They also may place marks of identification on personally made guns that they purchase and sell under the direct supervision of another licensee in accordance with the rule. Persons performing these activities are distinguished from persons who engage in the business of completing or assembling parts kits, applying coatings, or otherwise producing new remanufactured firearms, frames, receivers, or complete weapons for sale or distribution. Such persons must be licensed as manufacturers. Next one is marking requirements for firearms. The final rule makes a number of amendments to the proposed marking requirements. In addition, marking requirements to the new definition of frame or receiver that describes a single component, the final rule amends the text to explain how and when the multi-piece frames or receivers are identified, and that an identified modular subpart thereof may only be removed and replaced under certain limited conditions. With regard to the size and depth of markings, that means you can't take an upper and lower apart if it's a new firearm coming forward. Well, not an AR, but any new gun that gets invented with an upper and lower, they won't be able to come apart anymore. They'll have to be serialized and stay together as part of the same receiver. Anyway, with regard to the size of markings, some minor change was made to clarify that only serial number and associated license number need be marked in a print size no smaller than 16th inch, and the section addressing the meaning of marking terms. The final rule also defines the term identified to mean placement of identifying markings, clarifies the term legibly, means that the unique identifying number within a serial number may indicate or may include non-numeric characters, and also clarifies that the term conspicuous means that the markings must be capable of being seen with the naked eye. We still connected? All right, so this is page 297. We continue on. As the time period for manufacturers to identify the firearms they produce, the term "from completion of the active manufacturing process" was not adopted in favor of the clearer statement, "the entire manufacturing process has ended." The exclusion from the time period for firearms actively awaiting materials was replaced with a rebuttable presumption that firearms awaiting materials, parts, or equipment to repair to be completed are presumed, absent reliable evidence to the contrary, to be in the manufacturing process. Also, the time limits to mark firearms differentiate in the final rule between non-NFA complete weapons and firearms or receivers disposed of separately, which must be marked within 7 days after completion of the manufacturing process, and NFA firearms parts are defined as firearms, which must be marked by close of the next business day. Give me some feedback. Am I connected? I'm getting like weird internet ripples again. Hit the 3-hour mark, page 300. Man, less than 60 to go. Nobody's giving me any feedback. I don't even know if there's anybody out there listening or if I'm even connected. Let's see. Must be marked by close of the business day. This provides a reasonable grace period for which to mark firearms manufactured and makes them consistent with their respective record-keeping requirements under the JUSA and the ENFA. The final rule. Okay, thanks for the feedback. Appreciate it. The final rule does not adopt the proposed 7-day alternative for manufacturers to record acquisitions for non-NFA firearms if commercial records are maintained, as it was not necessary in light of the 7-day grace period to mark non-NFA weapons. NFA weapons and parts must be marked and recorded by close of the next business day after manufacture. Furthermore, the final rule does not adopt the provision allowing licensees to obtain a variance for the period of time in which to mark their firearms because the grace period being codified in the final rule are reasonable and well known to the industry. They also added that was part of it. The final rule makes minor conforming amendments to the proposed requirement to mark personally made firearms. Additionally, unlike the proposed rule, the final rule allows licensed or unlicensed engravers to mark firearms on a licensee's behalf with the requesting licensee's information, provided, 1, the identification takes place under the direct supervision of the requesting licensee without the engraver taking the firearm into inventory, and 2, the markings otherwise meet the identifying requirements. Also, the final rule text incorporates guidance from the comment period's preamble that the acceptable method of identifying a personally made firearm is by placing the serial number on a metal serial plate permanently embedded into the polymer frame of the receiver, or the method approved by the director. With regard to the marking exceptions, the final rule expands the rules allowing licensees to adopt and not mark the serial number of other identifying markings under certain conditions. Specifically, in light of comments received, the final rule allows licensed manufacturers to adopt and not mark the serial number and other markings previously placed on a firearm that has not been sold, shipped, or otherwise disposed of to a person other than a licensee. In other words, newly manufactured firearms. This change would supersede some other thing which requires ATF to be notified when marks are adopted as an alternative to marking. The final rule also provides more specificity when the proposed rule on how licensees who remanufacture or import firearms may adopt and not mark the markings of the firearms that were sold, shipped, or disposed of to a non-licensee. They could just get rid of stupid serial numbers, you know what I'm saying? The final rule allows licensed manufacturers to adopt the serial number and other identifying markings previously placed on a firearm by another licensee, provided the manufacturer is performing services as a gunsmith on existing firearms that are not for sale or distribution by a licensee. Further, the final rule allows licensees to adopt the unique identification number placed on a personally made firearm by its unlicensed mark maker, so long as the number is not duplicated on another firearm of the licensee. The number otherwise meets an identifying requirement, and the licensee adds their abbreviated FFL number as a prefix to the existing identification number so that the firearm can be traced to the licensee who identified the firearm. The final rule also differs from the proposed rule in that it does not require firearms muffler or silencer parts that are transferred to the further manufacture or repair to be actively in the manufacturing or repairing process if those parts are being transferred for those purposes. In this regard, the definition of transfer has been finalized as proposed to exclude temporary conveyances solely for repair. I don't think that's right. Conveyances, right? Solely for repair, identification, evaluation, research, testing, or calibration. 3 hours. The final rule retains the marking grandfathering provision, but revises the text to remove and configuration and defines new design to explain when a frame or receiver is eligible for this exception. Notably, the more limited final definition of new design only applies to changes in the design of the existing frame or receiver to the extent that it has been functionally modified or altered, as distinguished from performing a cosmetic process that adds to, changes the decoration of the frame or receiver, like painting or engraving, or by adding or replacing stocks, barrels, or accessories to the frame or receiver. With respect to the voluntary process for seeking an ATF classification of firearms, the final rule clarifies that a firearm sample submitted to the ATF must include all accessories and attachments relevant to the classification, that each request for classification of a partially complete, disassembled, or non-functional item kit must contain any associated templates, jigs, molds, equipment, or templates, whatever, that are made available by the seller or the distributor of the kit to the purchaser or the recipient of the item or the kit, and the instructions, guides, and marketing materials if they will be made available by the seller or the distributor with the item or the kit. Assholes. Further submissions of armor-piercing ammunition with a projectile or projectile core constructed entirely from one or a combination of tungsten steel. I'm reading this paragraph and it's in here. This isn't the Twilight Zone. They just went from marketing materials with kits to the next sentence says, further submissions of armor-piercing ammunition with a projectile or projectile core constructed entirely from one or more combination of tungsten steel alloys, steel, iron, brass, bronze, beryllium, copper, or depleted uranium must include a list of known handguns in which the ammunition may be used. Man, this is abuse and tyranny. This is infringement right there. That's tyranny right there. The changes will help to ensure that ATF can make proper classification of firearms and armor-piercing ammunition. The final rule also clarifies that ATF classifications of a specific component as a frame or receiver as distinguished from other frames or determinations, other firearms determinations may be considered applicable to or authoritative with respect to other firearms produced by the requester that are similar, so that separate classification does not need to be submitted to know which portion of a similar weapon to mark. Come on, man. Are you serious? This is what people are getting paid overtime to wear fancy suits and take limousines to read with their fingers out. Come on. Because firearms would not have made more than one frame or receiver, the final rule does not finalize the proposed changes to blah blah. To refer to in the plural form the manufacturer or importer name, country of manufacturer, or serial number in required records. I'm getting loopy. This is 3 hours in. I'm drinking some more. I'm gonna stand up and walk outside or something. I think that was English. I think I read it in the right order. I'm gonna go get some air. I'll be right back. This is nuts. It's crazy. Feel free to super chat while I'm done. This time you can talk. Like Zudak in charge this time. right, stretched a little bit and getting back at it here. I'd rather just finish this dang thing already. Sent off my extension for this year's taxes, of course, with an estimated payment. That's fun. So I'm paying for this. Got my recalculated penalty from taxes I hadn't paid before and paid them, and then had a re-estimated penalty. And then also, it's almost time this time of year to start paying estimated tax for next year. 3 different kinds of taxes because I suck at paying taxes, and I'm reading what those taxes are paying for. All right. Try this again. So this sounded weird to me, but this is the next section in the definitions of the new rules called record keeping. Let me know if I'm coming back. Okay, volume. Record keeping. Because firearms would not have more than one frame or receiver, the final rule does not finalize the proposed changes to refer to in the plural form, the manufacturer, importer, name, country, or manufacturer serial number in required records. However, in the unlikely event there is more than one manufacturer or importer, country, or manufacturer serial number marked on a firearm, licensees must still record more than one name, country, or serial number in accordance with the existing regulatory requirements. Well, that seems odd because they said that you would specifically need to put additional serial numbers on depending on how many processes were done in the manufacturer. In addition, the final rule substitutes transaction number for serial number in part whatever in respect to the manner in which the ATF Forms 4473 must be maintained to avoid confusion with the importer's manufacturer serial number placed on a firearm. Further, the proposed record-keeping requirement in part whatever to record a serial number is amended to clarify that any license number, either as a prefix or if it is remanufactured or imported, separated by a semicolon, must be recorded in the serial number column for accurate tracing. The final rule also amends the proposed record-keeping requirement for manufacturers to make clear that production and acquisition records for non-NFA firearms manufactured or otherwise acquired must be recorded within 7 days, not by close of the next business day as stated in the proposed rule. Though NFA items must be recorded by close of the next business day unless there is sufficient commercial record of acquisition, in which case the grace period to record would be extended until the 7th day. With regard to the licensee's acquisition of personally made guns into inventory, the final rule clarifies that Are we back again? Still says super low internet here. I'll just keep going. With regard to the licensee's acquisition of personally made firearms into inventory, the final rule clarifies that the serial number need not be immediately recorded. I think I said all that. Once the acquisition entry must be updated. Further, unlike the proposed rule, the final rule expressly allows licensed dealer gunsmiths, manufacturers, and importers to conduct same-day adjustments or repairs of unmarked personally made firearms without marking them, so as long as they don't accept them into inventory overnight and they are not returned to the person from whom they were returned to the person from whom they were received. If, however, the licensee has possession of the firearm from one day to another or longer, the firearm must be recorded as an acquisition and then as disposition in the A&D records upon return to the same customer. Personally made firearms are thereby treated similarly to commercially produced firearms when same-day adjustments or repairs are conducted. Additionally, the final rule clarifies that personally made firearms must be recorded as an acquisition whenever it is marked for identification, including same day or on the spot. All right. The only exception is whenever it is marked for the only exception is when another licensee places markings for or under the direct supervision of the licensee who recorded the acquisition. Okay. So that's how they get every gun into the system without getting it in there twice. In that circumstance, the licensee marking the firearm need not enter the PMF as an acquisition of or mark the PMF with their own information. So the rule also finalizes with minor changes the proposed amendment to whatever that allows manufacturers to delay submission of the Form 2 Notice of Firearms Manufactured or Imported if the muffler or silencers are transferred between qualified licensees for further manufacture or to complete new devices that are registered upon completion of the device or to repair existing registered devices. Boy, there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about on this one. So record retention is the next item in the rules to be defined. This rule finalizes with few changes to the proposed requirement that all licensees retain their records until business or license activity is discontinued, either on paper or in an electronic alternative method approved by the director, at business or collection purposes readily available for inspection. The final rule made changes to the whatever to make it clear that warehouses for storage of firearms or ammunition inventory may be used for storage of the records for over 20 years of age. The warehouse may also be used to conduct other business, which would require a separate license and fee. Oh no, the warehouse may not be used to conduct other businesses, which would require another license and fee. Next thing to be defined by the new rules is the effect on prior ATF rulings and procedures. Letter K on page 303. ATF publishes formal rulings and procedures to promote uniform understanding and application of the laws and regulations it administers, and to provide uniform methods of performing operations in compliance with the requirements of the law and regulations. ATF rulings represent ATF guidance as to the application of the law and regulations to the entire state of facts involved and apply retroactively unless otherwise indicated. Certain ATF rulings and one ATF procedure are impacted by this final rule as follows. The following rulings are hereby superseded, blah, 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 blah. The final rulings are hereby amplified. A bunch of other blah, blah, blahs, like 2 pages of blah, blah, blahs. And then it gets into severability. Based on the comments received in opposition to this rule, there is a reasonable possibility that this rule will be subject to litigation challenges. You son of a bitches know that that's coming. The department has determined that this rule implements and is fully consistent with governing law. Yeah, suck it. However, in an event, any provision of this rule, an amendment or revision made by this rule, or the application of such provision or amendment or revision to any person or circumstances held to be invalid or unenforceable by items, the remainder of this rule, the amendments or the revisions made by this rule, and the application of these provisions of such rule to any person, circumstances shall be affected and shall be construed as to give the maximum effect permitted by law. That's abuse right there. That is tyranny and abuse right there. Holy shit. Holy shit. That's holy crap. That's the last of the definitions. I'm going to read this one again. So what the hell does severability even freaking mean? Using a fancy word at us. Let's go see what that means. Come on. Oh, now there's a mosquito. Is this really a mosquito or is it a government bug? I couldn't get it. It could easily have been a robot. Oh, what is it doing? There it is. Oh no, it's a real one. Or it's a very sophisticated micro robot. Severability. In law, severability refers to states that illegal or otherwise forcible. The remainder of the contract should still apply. Oh, a tactic of scoundrels, it sounds like. All right, so based on the comments received in opposition to this rule, There is a reasonable possibility that this rule will be subject to litigation challenges. The department has determined that this rule implements and is fully consistent with governing law. However, in the event any provision of this rule, an amendment or revision made by this rule, or the application of such provision or amendment or revision to any person or circumstance is held to be invalid or unenforceable by its terms, the remainder of this rule, the amendments or revisions made by this rule, and the applications of the provisions of such rule to any persons or circumstances shall not be affected and shall be construed as to give them maximum effect permitted by law. That's desperate shit. That's just made out of balsa wood and tissue paper. A freaking 9mm could knock this over. This is super fake garbage, and anybody who's scared of this is exploiting it. And if you are literally, you're not paying attention, this is easy to push over. Holy shit, we should be pushing this over and getting the NFA, getting rid of the NFA. Nobody's even listening. Now we're getting censored. 305 pages in. Go read the end of 304. The last paragraph of 304 is where they're scared shitless and they know that this law is garbage. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm totally confident that this law is garbage and it'll be challenged in multiple ways, and it'll encourage and empower and embolden and inspire and lead by to create an example for the community to rise up, similar to what we did in 2013, but now they're all better and gooder at it. So it'd be amazing what we're able, the consequence of this. This is going to be awesome. Unless, of course, Biden is just strategically outmaneuvered, y'all. I don't think that's happened, though. All right, thanks, Patriot. I wouldn't even be reading it if it wasn't for Patriot and Barbecue out there, a couple of others. All right, well, we're almost done. It's 305. There's only 59 more pages. Next is statutory and executive order review. Executive orders, blah, 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 and direct agencies to assist. Okay, so I guess I should read some of this. So executive orders, improving regulation and regulatory review, and another executive order, regulatory planning and review. Both direct agencies to assess the costs and benefits of available regulatory alternatives, and if regulation is necessary, to select regulatory approaches that maximize net benefits, including economic benefits, environmental benefits, public health and safety effects. Almost seems like it's crucial for them to keep suggesting that this is a public health issue. Anyway, distributive impacts and equity. Then this other executive order emphasizes the importance of both quantifying both costs and benefits, reducing costs, harmonizing rules, and promoting flexibility. The Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, the OMB, has determined that while, how does that even happen? How's that the OMB? That must be something else. I don't know what OMB is, has determined that while this final rule is not economically significant, it's a significant regulatory action under some other executive order, because this final rule raises novel legal or policy issues arising out of legal mandates. Accordingly, the rule has been reviewed by the OMBA, whatever that is, the need for federal regulatory action. It's the next section here. The proposed rule changes, ATF stated that this rule would address externalities. Public comments stated that externalities deal with the inefficiencies from market transactions, not actions dealing with government. ATF concurs that this rule would not address externalities due to market inefficiencies. Therefore, to avoid any confusion, ATF has removed language that suggested this rule would address a market inefficiency. They did it again. Like, oh, snap, this doesn't save any money. So how are we going to solve that? By not saying it saves money. Because they used to just say it saves money. So now they've addressed that by quit saying it saves money. I'll shut up. Regardless, the publication of this final rule remains necessary to enforce the Gun Control Act and the NFA. Agencies take regulatory action for various reasons. One of the reasons is to carry out Congress's policy decisions as expressed in statutes. Here, this rulemaking aims to implement Congress's policy decision to require licensing, marking, record keeping, and background checks so that firearms can be traced if used in crime, and to prevent prohibited persons from acquiring them. This final rule is necessary. This final rule is necessary is to address. I don't know. They got an extra "is" in there. They got too many "ises." Does this mean it's invalid? I think it's they got the too many "is" invalidity rule to address recent court cases which have narrowly construed ATF's current regulatory definition of frame or receiver. Such a narrow construction of a regulatory term creates the possibility that future courts may hold that the majority of regulated firearms frames or receivers do not meet the existing definition. Furthermore, administrative inspections, criminal investigations, and prosecutions are hindered when personally made firearms, which are untraceable, are accepted into and disposed from a licensee's inventory, and when firearms records are destroyed after 20 years, despite the need for these records to combat criminal activities. It says that. It says the need of these records to set. Just be aware that you got to cut grass all the time. You know, you got to mow the lawn. You got to do things periodically, shovel snow, right? You got to just paint the house every once in a while. It's an obligation to just be living in a nice neighborhood. You cannot do it. Your neighborhood looks like garbage, right? You can ignore government and it turns to this. Just pay attention to it and hold them to task. We got plenty of options, so many possibilities. My recommendation is checking out the DC Project. It's probably one of the best resources we have, and why they've had to put this paper mache balsa wood garbage in front of us and act like it's a giant threat. All right, anyway, the next thing is this final rule updates the existing definition of frame or receiver to account for technological advances in the industry and ensure that firearms continue to remain under the regulatory regime as intended by the enactment of the Gun Control Act, including accounting for manufacturing of firearms parts kits and personally made firearms from those kits. The narrow interpretation of what constitutes a frame or receiver by some courts may potentially allow persons to avoid 1, having to obtain a license to engage in the business of manufacturing or importing frames or receivers. Sorry about that. The mute is very difficult to find. And then 2, identifying frames or receivers with a serial number and other traceable markings. 3, maintaining records of frames or receivers produced or imported through which they can be traced. And 4, running NICS checks on potential transferees to determine if they are legally prohibited from receiving enforcement's ability. This is saying 4, running NICS checks on potential transferees to determine if they are legally prohibited from receiving enforcement's ability to trace semi-automatic firearms used in the commission of crime. That is a page missing. Ha. We got them again. There's a page missing. Ha. Prohibited from receiving. There's something missing here. This is wrong. This is not the correct end of this sentence. So there's a whole bunch of shenanigans going on here. All right, well, I have to pick up where it left off here. Ability to trace firearms used in the commission of a crime would be severely impeded. The final rule makes consistent the marking requirements for firearms to facilitate tracing in the event a firearm is used in the commission of a crime. In order to accommodate the additional personal firearms marking requirements, this final rule clarifies and expands the definition of gunsmithing. In addition, the final rule requires FFLs to retain all firearms records, either in hard copy or electronically, until the firearms licensed business or licensed activity is discontinued. For more specific details regarding the need for regulation, please refer to the specific chapters of the standalone analysis pertaining to each provision of this final rule. So, were we on 1 before? All right, I guess the first one was the need for regulatory action, and now we're somehow into 2nd, the summary of affected population, costs, and benefits. Table this on page, we're jumping into page 308 here pretty much. Table 2 provides a summary of the affected population and anticipated costs and benefits of promulgating this rule. I got to figure out what that word is. We're looking at a chart. Summary of affected population, costs, and benefits. On the left, they got the categories, and on the right, they got the final rule. It's garbage. I'm not going to read all that. It's a bunch of shit. Then we got changes from the thing. Turn it into garbage. This looks like a freaking military manual now. You know how they look like just a bunch of crap, and you got to spend like half the day trying to figure out where this clicks to that. It's like a choose your own adventure, except you're going to jail if you do it wrong, or you die because you got the instructions wrong on something that matters. So this is something that I'm not going to try to read this. This is a bunch of bullet points. Maybe I should. I don't know. This is the last 50 pages. Here's the deal. Go to the other channel that read all 164. I don't think I'm going to read all of these. This is like under the final regulatory flexibility analysis must contain a statement for the need. I think these are just clarifying the things that they complied with, because they got this unnecessary bureaucratic pile of shit that they got to deal with, all these different reviews and analyses. Paperwork Reduction Act, unfunded mandates reform. We've seen some of these in the stuff before. So what they're getting is like kind of, I guess they're defending their positions on things like the Congressional Review Act, the Small Business Regulatory Enforcement and Fairness Act. So they're saying things like this rule is likely to have a significant economic impact on substantial number of small businesses. This is probably a lot of kernels of good information, but I suspect it's going to be reiterating what was already in the summaries and the parts that we've read. And I'm 3.5 hours into it. Let me go back and look. This was after a few days. So this was like, hey, I'm just going to go read this. And then now everyone knows you don't just read 360 something pages. It takes a little while. All right, so we went in the first day, read 45 pages, and that took an hour and a half. Second day, 3.5 hours to read up to page 150. So that's, now we're up to 5 hours. The next day, another 3 hours. That brings us up to 8 hours to get up to page 232. And then today we went from 232 to approximately 307, let's say. So basically to this form right here. So what did I just say? That's like 12 hours? Holy crap, is that 12 hours? 9, 11? Holy crap, more than 12 hours reading this thing. So yeah, I'm going to quit. I'm not upset like I was the other days. This part's just getting boring and I'm pretty sure repetitive. But guess what? Lawyers get paid to do this stuff. I'm just doing it so we get it out there. One, now people can hear it. Anybody that wants to listen to this, hopefully they didn't hear all the way till now and figure out that you can go back and listen to it as a recording in double time. Listen to it at twice the speed, and because it just talks faster or whatever. So that's one way to listen to it quicker, or put it on when you're doing something horrible like cutting the grass or mowing the lawn or whatever, I guess, doing chores and stuff that are repetitive and necessary so that you have a better life and you live in a nicer house. You don't hate the grass. You want the grass, right? You don't hate the government. We need a government so that we can live in liberty, freedom, individual freedom, be able to do what we want. Requires liberty. Liberty is a whole bunch of people doing what they want, living with each other, figuring it out. Our system has lived through a civil war, 2 world wars, and we've been a beacon of hope for people to the extent that people swarm to live here. They're not living here because it's horrible. It's because they have opportunity and they have an eager interest in coming here. So let's lead the example for them. Let's give them ways that they can participate. Well, you know what I mean? The people that are here, blah, blah, blah. I'm not trying to start shit here. But everybody came here from somewhere else, right? We all did. So let's remember that. And there are people that want to use us to our tendencies to keep, have suspect of people we don't know. We can challenge that by learning about other people. You got the internet. You don't have to go anywhere. You can just poke around on the internet, find some folks that you haven't hung out with before and hang out with them and see what it's like. And you'll find most of people, especially in the firearms community, are more than welcoming. And, that's the way we challenge this stuff. So Anyway, thanks for sticking with me here and reading it. I don't know where I got off on that tangent. Probably has something to do with the fact that I'm getting loopy after 3.5 hours of reading this after 12 hours of multiple days reading it. But I'm going to say I'm putting a feather in it. It's done. There's definitely a little bit more to read here. And if you're interested in doing that, like I just did by turning on the thing and going live, I know there are people out there that have issues with being able to have time or ability to read these things. And you'd be doing a service to everybody by getting it out there. You're making people aware of it, and you're making it accessible. So it's worth it. And you can do it better than I just did, right? You could use maybe a reader to do it automatically. That would be smarter. And if you can figure out a way to AI to, get rid of some of the stuff to make it more understandable to a human brain, that would be great. So hopefully this inspired somebody who knows how to use technology to accomplish what it took me 12 hours to do the old-fashioned way. Anybody's listening to the end of this, but you never know. So again, thanks to the couple of people who super chatted. There's literally 2 people that super chatted throughout this 12-hour session. Thanks to them. One of them is Mark, and the other one is Gun Library Garrett. Do appreciate it. That's the money I made this week. So not bitching. I got Patreons that made it possible for me to even consider taking the time off. But anybody that wants to support what we do on our different projects, we have the Gear website store, and we have our Patreon. All right, with that, I'll drop a ending thing here. Have a good one. GearWebsites.com is your source for firearms-based playing cards and books. We also have mugs, shirts, and posters with designs that we've made live. Of course, we have patches. Every Friday is Free Patch Friday. We appreciate your support. Thank you for shopping at GearWebsites.com. So let us know what you think. We'll be watching the comments wherever you find the video, over on Gunstreamer.com or on GunTube.org. Thank you for supporting our projects. If you'd like to buy us a cup of coffee, check out our Patreon channel.
The guys and gals of GunWebsites.com encourages you to take a CCW class every year, practice at least once a month, and carry every day. Thank you for watching GunWebsites.com.